Man, I did a bunch of things to this. I don't even know if it works anymore. Probably a good thing to check would be see it on a mobile device, maybe? We can go check that really quickly. And disable my mic. Things okay. We can continue. Did a bunch of tweaking with my audio settings. Realized that there was something wrong with my mic. Tried to resolve it. Hopefully everything should be alright though. I shouldn't be cutting out anymore. And I should be more audible, maybe with less noise in the background. Because I probably don't want to be streaming with any music. But this device, I feel like. I think it'll be okay. Let me quickly check on the dashboard. Hopefully things are alright. Not to mention the fact that we have no idea whether the internet, a bunch of things are happening recently. But I think it should be okay for the most part. Do one quick verification on the phone, and then we can see. The reason I'm continuously talking is because I'm trying to load up my my phone in the meantime. I'm able to hear myself. All right, let's see. Okay, this is going to be a quick mic test. Test 1 2 3. Test 1 2 3. Now lower. Test 1 2 3. 1 2 3. All right, so the lower test didn't actually pick up. I was watching my levels there. All right, this concludes our audio testing. I think it should be okay. Abs, dude, thanks for the sub, man. How's it going? Good to see you. Thanks for linking me that thing on Instagram, by the way. It was very cool. I like those lost edges. Not the biggest fan of watercolor as a medium, but always going to be people that impress me. Quickly going to change something. I believe what's happening is that the latching doesn't happen for long enough for the lower value. So what I need to do is adjust one of the filters. That would be my noise gate. And we lower the close threshold slightly because I always start my sentences quite loud, but sometimes I can trail off. And maybe I'll slightly also make the open threshold slightly lower as well. And I think that should be all right. Yeah, there we go. I think that's what I need. I'm gonna just test some ambient noises now, just so that doesn't cause a problem. That's taps on my screen. Okay, just loud taps is all I can hear. And I'm sure you can hear the clicking of my mouse. But we should be okay. All right, I have a crit to do before I start. Crit for Angevir. New setup and location? Not really, just that I had to spend a few nights somewhere else. And I reset up my things over here back home. And I just did a bunch of tweaking for my mic and other things because it's been a while since I've done that. Anyway, we're gonna go help Ona with this piece because she needs some help on the colors. But yeah, just let me know how things are sounding. Okie dokie, the question on this particular piece, I don't know if Ona's in here, but I'm just gonna do it anyway and just ask her to look at the WOD. But the question is, how are the colors on this particular piece? So the entire crit's gonna be based on the color. Of course, there's not much I can really touch in this painting when it comes to the overall design and drawing and whatnot. I think everything's okay. So let's start out with artist predilection. So what is the issue that is usually faced by the artist? So I looked at a lot of Angevir's work. The biggest concern at the very beginning is, are there majority cool colors? Because we seem to be staying around all the time, around that majority cool idea. So deviating from it is something that we could ask ourselves a question about. Of course, you can always default to this kind of cool idea in pieces just because it's probably easier and more familiar at this point. But I think the question should be raised, how cool do I want to go? But what about existing elements? Before we do any major changes to the whole scheme on the painting, what about some minor changes? How about some rearrangement, right? So for the overall read of the painting, there's one big issue here, which is being affected quite severely, not by the value so much as the color contrast. And it's these saturated red regions down here. So it's drawing a lot of attention and away from the face over here. So what I want to do is my first little initial fix on this. Let me duplicate this so I have a spare. But the first little thing that we're going to be trying to do here is we're going to just take some of the warmness that's down there. Just grab some of the warmness that's down here, and we're going to start introducing that up top. And hopefully that kind of solves a little issue. So the first thing we do is I'm just going to transplant this value up there for the time being. I'll make that slightly lighter. So it's going to use some overlay for the time being just because it's quicker. But of course this will be straight painted. Maybe you can do that a bit more sensibly. I don't want it to be affecting the skin value. Let's just use it in the area of light. Like that. We'll up that saturation and bring it up. Maybe more of an organic value like that. So now we have that red up there. And I want to intentionally take it away from down here. So we're going to just hit this with a little dash of gray. I don't want it to be cool because that would be kind of changing up the design a little bit too much. It could potentially be blue because it's against white, so you have equal opportunity because the contrast, as far as the color contrast goes, if the saturations are equal, a blue versus a red will have about the same read. The red obviously having more of a read because it's against a generally cool background. That's the kind of idea we're playing around with. So let's just quickly hit this with a bit of desat, and we'll take some of the color out of that area. We can do this in a few ways. Let's just hit it with a bit of colorize maybe. What was the initial, right over there. So let's dab a little bit of desaturatedness in this. We'll just pull it back. Not to a gray, but maybe with a little bit of those saturated elements poking out. And this kind of helps a lot with that focus, right? Having that extreme, because I like the idea. I'm a big fan of this notion of having really, really strong kind of contrasting elements, especially when it's a character render. It's a big, very, very useful tool. Of course, one of the primary mistakes over here is that the saturation.
I can't believe you've done this.
Hey, thanks for the follow. I appreciate you. So one of the issues here is that, I mean, be a little bit careful. So this is something that I just did, and I just want to inform people about like why the change may not be as impactful as it could be. It's because light is additive. So if the light's going to have an effect on something, it's going to have an effect in the area of light. So if the light's red, it's not going to have any effect on the shadows if the light changes to green. I think that's a really important thing to understand. It'll change your halftone, it'll change your highlight, it'll change your area of light, but it won't change the shadow because again, light is additive. Big deal. So going along with that concept, we kind of have equal kind of saturation ideas over here, because if this area is seeing a little bit less light, that means it's seeing a little bit less of whatever is casting on top of this, which means that it's going to have some sort of variance. In the book Alla Prima by an incredible great master artist by the name of Richard Schmidt, in the book he says, please do not consider value transitions without considering the fact that it'll affect the color. What does that mean? That means that when light hits things in varying degrees and varying amounts of potency, it's going to have an effect on what color you choose. So he's an oil painter, so he mixes different colors. Not to say that this is always going to be the case. Some objects are very homogeneous for specific reasons, but in general, really important thing about the fact, it's a question you have to ask yourself. Because if ever a piece looks too muddy, too plain, too uninspired, most of the time maybe the problem if it's in the color space. You should have told me you're starting now. How much did I actually miss? I missed out a little bit earlier. I made one single change so far, but nothing too great. So I'm just gonna turn that down. So I'm just gonna go darker. We'll turn that down a little bit. Maybe push it more towards that the desat. Just a little bit of a change. It really matters to me. Big deal to me. Just join the stream and oh my god, I love your unique style. This is not my painting. This is Angevir's. This is not my painting. I don't want to take credit over here. This is a crit. Ona in the chat, she's right above your message. She's the one that painted this. Excellent artist, very good. A good friend of mine as well. This is the kind of work that I do. I just did this little portrait yesterday, and some of the portraits that I've done earlier. I'm going to be doing more portraits today. I'm just helping somebody out with their own piece. But yeah, it's an incredible piece. So on the first question rather, just to kind of recap to save you some time. The first question is, do I want majority cool in this piece? Because majority cool is in every piece, we know. And we want to be a little bit careful. We want to make it a bit of a conscious decision. That's the first question. No easy answer, of course. It can or cannot happen. It's ultimately up to you. Just a concern, right, to think about. Secondly, I shifted something over here. So my issue with this piece initially is a lot of the red saturated elements, the color contrasty elements, right? The real powerful punchy statements of the piece. Where down here, away from the area of focus, a kind of a similar issue that we had with the previous piece. So all I did was I shifted that saturation up there and I cut it down over here. So I still have some notes of red to play around with, and I can still, I can slightly strengthen this up. Can mute it in a certain way, but I can still play around with it. And now that kind of gets the focus back up here. Of course, there are alternative solutions to this. Instead of maybe increasing the saturation, I could also increase the color contrast over here by adding more blue elements, kind of get the read back up near the face. But that's one of the simplest little changes we can make. Need a moody forest and toned down clothing. Yeah, the general problems are hard to get rid of. Yeah, they're definitely hard, but I think it fits the idea right now, so no need to change it. Also, fantastic job on the clothing and the design and the drawing. I think one of my favorites from you so far. Okay, so that's one of the issues with the read. So now we kind of reestablish the read. The eyes are going, well, as long as the rendering continues and down this part, the eyes are going to go where they need to go. A couple of questions when it comes to the light sources. So when we define this piece as what is it sitting on top of, we say that the key light is a cool light. That's a light right behind the character. The key light is a cool light coming from perhaps an overcast sky, but that light in the back is going to have very, very little effect on the character because it's behind the character, right? So there's something that we understand. So now the question is, so the light's coming back here, it'll have an effect on everything around the silhouette, which has been correctly executed, but the character's skin itself, rather pale at the moment. And now that's a question, do we want to maintain it this pale, and does it make sense for it to be this pale? Because the skin, there's no default color, I mean, know this, and you know this very well, because you paint skin, I think, better than I do. It needs to be pale and blue. Okay, that's interesting. So maybe to compensate for that a little bit, kind of bring that idea more, I would potentially try to warm up this area over here. Because the character is so clothed, for example, just to kind of give my logic in the air right now, if this character had his face without any fur element around it, then immediately I would switch the color of the background to a warmer. All right, really, really important. You finally unbanned me. I unbanned you like weeks ago. But yeah, I would switch the color immediately. But because we have this element that's kind of transitionary shape to play around with, we have the liberty of kind of bringing that out a little bit further. So how do I make this face look maybe a little bit cooler, or have it be a little bit more vibrant without actually changing the local color of it? So we can keep it nice and pale and desaturated, but I can obviously start to put in just little bits of notes around the piece. So for example, we could start to make stronger statements with some of this orange over here, for example. And we can bring in, as opposed to deep reds, we can bring in some deeper values right over there. So to warm it around, to make it obvious it was the intended skin tone. Exactly, so we wanted to have a bit of a division here. So we can keep, so this kind of rich color is like, I think it's much needed in this particular location. Also, just one little bit of a design issue is that this little offset bear, I think the bear has been well painted, but I don't know what the design is like. You might be going off of reference, but I would really, you could have told me you did. What's the fun in that? But I would probably, if it's not in the design specifications, I would consider a variation with this right on top of his head. But also it's kind of cool as well. I kind of like it, to be honest. It's a little bit out there, but I don't think not that much. I think it's fine. So definitely bringing out some of these warm tones. We're having a little bit of an effect, which is I can't really tell what the light source is on the fill light in this particular piece, right? So if the nomenclature is this is any issue with the nomenclature from the stream side, it's like this. So basically, this is the condition that we have. I offset it to reveal more of the face. I might need more tinkering to make it work though. Well, it's the offset. I mean, I agree. I kind of like the fact that one is non-revealed, but maybe I don't agree entirely with the way that it's been offset. But it's painted well, so I don't think it's that much of an issue. I think it's painted quite well. I like the shapes on it. But this is the idea. So this whiteness around the character, that's the key light in this particular piece, right? Just to make sure the nomenclature is not getting bogged down. So that's the key light behind. And the issue with key light is that if you were going to look at this character against the key light, it would just be silhouetted quite dark because you wouldn't be able to see inside. But there could be a secondary light that lights the character inside, and we call that the fill light in this particular case. So that's usually going to be less than the key light, and it'll should be able to show you the forms that are within. So ultimately, this light source around over here has the most kind of effect around the silhouette, the outside edges right over there, and this little fill light will have the effect on the inside of the contour. Now, the question is, what is that fill light color? Really important for us to know this, because otherwise everything on the piece becomes a little bit less unified. Always my advice is, if you have a key light and you have a fill light, maybe switch them around a little bit in terms of what the temperature is, just so you can kind of get more of a color dynamic on your piece. So that's what I would probably consider. So maybe kind of indicating that this fill light is a warm fill light. You can still very well keep all your shadow shapes, but perhaps on the areas that are kind of facing towards us, let's just imagine, we don't need to justify what it is. It could be anything. It could be a fire, it could be a torchlight, it could be a lamp, it could be an explosion, it could be fire of any sort of varying amounts. Could be a spell in the distance, could be a house in the distance. It could be anything. But the idea is, I mean, we want to have this kind of color range to use in our piece. So let's just grab the same little thing that I had over here, and it is light, so it needs to go lighter. But again, lighter, the idea of something going lighter is very contextual. For example, if I shine a light on somebody wearing a white scarf with a leather jacket, the light areas on the leather jacket and the light areas in the scarf will be dramatically different because of the local color variation. Big thing to remember over there. So in that idea, kind of continuing along that path, we'll add in some what is contextually a lighter value on the little dress here, on the little, what would you call this? The little shoulder element with the feathers on there. So we can just throw in something like that, maybe we desaturate slightly if it's generally cool. And some of this kind of idea gives you a little bit more range to play with. I would maybe go a little bit more redder as well with this. So depending on what the actual temperature is. And this starts to unify the piece because we have this kind of same idea down there. Now you're gonna have to make eventually some sort of like conclusion on exactly where the light source is coming from, because that'll allow you to keep a very consistent logic in your piece about where to add your highlights. For example, if the light source is coming from maybe the bottom sort of area, then you would have the most saturation, most lightness down over here, for example. That's your interaction of color and surface. So down here, and then perhaps you would have some sort of shapes down here as well that sort of show you that that's happening. I missed the beginning. What was the thought process behind making the neck piece red? It's what I just mentioned earlier. It's that the read is being affected quite strongly because right now the attention, despite there being quite a lot of value difference right over here, the red is a very, very strong statement to see in pieces, used quite often in a lot of concept art pieces, a lot of character design pieces. So the attention is kind of being diminished slightly because of the strong saturated elements down here and the lack of distinct saturation up here. So right now you're kind of using just value to get your read, but you could kind of amp the read even further, make it a lot more clear and readable, but just shifting it up there. And now immediately the eye goes up there. So I shifted it up here. And of course you don't have to use that value. I could very easily use the exact same value that you used. So maybe, what is that value? That's this. So we can just shift it up there. It doesn't have to be as heavy-handed, but now the read's kind of solved, just about, it's kind of solved. Because we don't have that issue anymore. Because again, there's a lot of distracting shapes over here because your simplified model, as you would usually do, it has a lot of like noise right over here, and you have noise. You have some noise over here, but not nearly as much as this. So you need to add some color contrast to compensate for it. And it's just a general rule of thumb, I feel like, is that you kind of keep those saturated elements. You don't have to keep them right over there, but it needs to be there, and then it can be in other places as well. But again, still managed. Like this can still go to red, but it wouldn't go nearly as red. I think it would be kept warm, but not nearly as warm. So that's still, I can still get that red, but then my read is not affected nearly as much. This kind of idea. So I would consider on this particular areas, like these areas, for example, just to give a little bit more of that lighting information. I like that idea that this warmness is on there, and it gives you a good dynamic. I realized that by having such a range of colors on the piece threatens to go towards slightly HDR, an HDR kind of look. If anybody's curious what HDR means, it's like high dynamic range. So you see a lot of colors in the darks, a lot of colors in the lights. So places like Riot, for example, Blizzard, a lot of their art for things like Hearthstone and some of the Warcraft promotional stuff, you see a crazy dynamic of colors there, which just doesn't really exist in real life. You don't see that much of a dynamic in light and shadow in terms of colors. So it's worth thinking about if you want to mute something. I think that's perfectly fine. But I think just going around here and then slightly kind of showing the effect of this new light source that we kind of defined, just slightly saturating elements that would be saturated, like that, for example. And then the ones that are blue or cool in this color space, those ones go towards desaturated. So these become rather gray, and it all kind of serves. I like the Riot and Blizzard art style. Yeah, definitely not for me. I'm very much towards the From Software. Not CD Projekt Red exactly, because it depends on what they're working on. The Santa Monica Studio, I like those palettes a lot more. I like those drawings a lot more. But of course, I mean, it takes a crazy amount of skill, regardless. So again, just kind of adding more of that warmthness, giving the light source a bit of identity. It doesn't need to be too much, right? But just something like that can really serve to kind of liven up that piece, give you that range that you might be looking for. So what does that mean in the context of the face? The highlights in the face will probably be kind of not warm, but warm desaturated. And of course, the light areas of the face will be the most desaturated. So currently, I feel like you already have that set up on there. So that's perfectly fine. And of course, the reflections in the eyes, for example, will be maybe warmer as well. These kinds of ideas. So just a little bit more into that range, right? So now we're kind of getting much more of a range of color on there, and it's giving us some of that dynamic that we're sort of missing. And it's also bringing some much needed warmth. Of course, to unify the piece, I would definitely throw in, I love the colors down here, by the way, really appealing to my own personal taste in color. But again, for the purposes of the piece, we would potentially want to consider slightly warming up these areas as well, down here, just for unification purposes. And have that foreground be a little bit warmer. Because that kind of helps the read of foreground versus background, because another great thing that comes from the Schmidt book, Alla Prima, is he says, when you're trying to solve an issue of read later on in the piece, most likely the solution comes because of a color change as opposed to a value change. And the reason he works in this manner is because he wants to prevent his overall read that he initially had for his block-in. He wants to prevent that from being affected. So when you start a painting, depending on how you start, most of the time we start it in a way that gives us a lot of control over the values. Some people start desaturated like me. Some people start with black and white. There's so many artists that do that. So that can be somewhat lost sometimes when the painting is being worked on over and over again for an extended period of time. So this kind of lets your value range remain the same, and it just simply affects the color space in order to get a better read. So that kind of really helps kind of put the character in the foreground a lot more. We don't lose as much. We definitely want to lose something, right? We want to lose something down there because the attention has to go up there. So of course, when you affect the line weight, the line weight down here, it'll be somewhat solved as well. But just something to consider because we're talking about the overall color space of the piece. Got a small emergency, so running off for a bit. Please continue to quit, but watch. I think I'm just about done. I think that's the only thing that would change. Just show more of this this fill light, the effect of it. I really want to see more fill light just to balance out the piece, because if that's done properly, then we have actually a good warm cool balance in the piece, which is nice. Right now this is looking a little bit too cool, which I think was affecting it, and of course the change with the red over there. I'll Discord this to you for later evaluation. But yeah, thanks for submitting. A great piece, by the way. Really like the design. I was actually staring at it before I started. Let's quickly retrieve this. Oh, there we go. All shipped. Now I can begin painting. Let's go back here. I'm currently painting from Maddie's references. Maddie's a fellow streamer, one of the best study streamers on Twitch. If you are not familiar, please go check her out. For some reason this refuses to do the fill. Oh, you know what, I know why. Thankfully I've used this program before. There you go. I'm gonna have to pick one of these to begin with. I want to do at least 2 today, so a couple of maybe 90-minute portraits. What's a decent one to start out with? I like this one on the left. We'll do this one on the left. Really straightforward. Grab that, put it in appropriate size. Quickly change up that the dimensions of our canvas, and then we can start painting. On that. All right, I think we should be good to go. Take a drink of water, and then we'll start. References on Maddie's Discord as always for the art club, I think it's called, pieces. But I can always link it in the chat as necessary. Okay, let me put my air conditioner on as well. It's getting a little bit torrid in here. All right, now we're good. With that, all right. So let me get my timer up. Hopefully everything has been sorted. It does indeed work. So 3, 2, 1, and we go. Just as that. As simple as that. Let me just drag my OBS to my other screen. I actually want to be able to peek at that timer. I don't physically see it on my screen. Maybe I should adjust it so that actually happens. Okay. What do we do at the very beginning? Let's just fill out this canvas, shall we? I don't like dead canvases. Big. What's the opposite of the word proponent? I don't like them. So we'll just start with something mildly desaturated. What am I looking for right now? Just a mild notion of temperature and a fair notion of value. So why both? Well, because temperature, it aids a lot with the read. It's a big deal to me. So it aids a lot with the overall read of the drawing. So temperature is always a concern for me. Let's bring that gradient the other way around. That looks fine. And also because of the fact that the value is going to also affect the read. So it's all about read right now. The background needs to be able to substantiate what's on your canvas. I'm quickly kind of figure out this mess that my krita is causing. Now I think everything's okay. We just block some stuff out, right? So what do we block in? How do you start a painting, man? That's a big question. Always kind of daunting putting that first mark on. What do you look for? Well, something that I've been taught recently is that we can always look for the simplest shape, right? So we don't try and just immediately get every little nuance out of the way in a painting, but we look for that simplest shape. So let's just grab something that can block something out. So that's okay. I want something with a little bit less lag. I want to be nice and loose with my lines. That has a significant amount of lag to it. One of the problems with streaming is it slows me down quite a bit because of the fact that sometimes things aren't exactly as responsive as I'd like them to be. But hey, we can't complain about it. I choose to stream, so we choose to embark on this trepidatious journey. I'll just pick something like that. I feel like I'm picking brushes for way too long. The next one I pick, I'm going to just settle on. That's okay. Okay. So what's the simplest shape over here? What's the easiest to kind of measure? So we can say that this little area over here is maybe a little bit more than a third of the overall height of the canvas. So that's a little bit of a rule right there. So we can just go ahead and put a single line right there. And they get that third, right? A couple of lines even is what I did right there. And right after that, I can see some little large shapes for the overall jacket. So I see something like that right there. And I see something like this right here. Kind of giving me that, almost like a B-ish, like a bill of a bird of some sort. So I get that. That's right now the neck region. So all I'm doing is I'm just painting within this shape, right? I'm just going to find out that internal shape really quickly. Right over there. I can find this distance as well. So the idea comes from Richard Schmidt again. I've been reading his book a lot lately. It's been great company. I've been out and about quite regularly these days. So he says, don't start the painting with things that are the most complex. Start it with the most simplest element and then use it as a solid foundation for your future measurements. That makes a lot of sense, right? Schmidt's somebody that really does not like overpainting over and over again, making corrections. It makes sense because A, he's a traditional painter, and B, he's a oil painter, so definitely not somebody that would want to make continuous corrections onto his piece. So it does make a lot of sense. And just in general, one of the biggest things that will save you time on a painting is the fact that you don't want to be spending all that much time trying to fix mistakes. So trying to be intentional, trying to be accurate is something that should be a concern. But again, a bit of a note, because I'm very much a beginner to all of this. So with that in mind, I do remember some of the issues that I found when I was first trying to do things like this. And one of the biggest issues I found was I was so focused on the idea of accuracy that I was basically paralyzed on my canvas. I wasn't doing anything. And that was a problem. That's a big problem. You don't want that to happen. There's a bit of a balance that needs to be struck there. A bit of a balance there. So you want to be intentional. You want to definitely put a lot of effort into trying to, give your best impression of what you look at, but don't do nothing. Don't just sit there and do nothing. Kind of be active on the canvas, because most of the time, no matter what you do, because of some reason or the other, it's not going to be perfect, and that's perfectly fine. Because you reallocate some time for correction, and some of those strokes, none of those strokes are really wasted, right? Because the idea of a wasted stroke to me is a stroke that eventually it never ever is seen by the audience, or, and this is the big one, it's never used by the artist to help get that read that is seen by the audience, right? It's a really big deal to me, because I don't like wasting my time on my canvas. So it's a really big deal. So if a stroke helps you find another stroke, it's a very valuable stroke still. So, and a lot of artists work this way, especially when it comes down to painting, right? A lot of painting, especially when it comes down to underpainting, it's not really seen by the audience at all. You don't really see the underpainting. But why do people still do it? Why do artists still, a lot of artists, a lot of very respectable master painters, why do they still employ the idea of an underpainting? It's mainly because it helps you structure, helps you organize. Really important things. Okay, let's just quickly get some logic in here, because again, I'm kind of running away with my lines here. I'm a little bit less intentional than I'd like to be when I'm streaming, and it's a problem that I've always tried to fight against. I get better at it every single time I do stream, but I haven't streamed in a while, or when I haven't streamed in a while, things tend to get a little bit more muddy on my canvas, just because I have to talk while I do this. Not because I have to, because I choose to. Eventually I do want to get to a point where my skills, or my comfort off stream is the same as on stream. I don't struggle with the talking part, I'm pretty good with the talking, but always a bit of an issue when it comes down to the idea of being accurate and intentional. It does take a lot of intentionalness. So let's just commit to a couple of those lines. Some slight bits of notes here, by the way, if you're doing this. Don't ever kind of line this out with a coolish color, because if this line bleeds through to your final image, you don't want it to bleed through towards cool. It's going to deaden the skin, not something you really want. So rather than that, I think a better idea, let's just kind of put a singular line right there for that shadow. But better than that, I think an idea is to just keep it warm. So in case there is a bleed through, which is very possible. I do everything on one layer, so the bleed throughs are going to be abound. If there is indeed a bleed through, it's going to bleed through towards warm, and that's totally fine. We don't care about bleed through to warm. Bleed through, if you're wondering about the terminology, it means that something is not perfectly flat. So therefore, in terms of the color, it's not just a filled color. It's got some sort of tooth to it. It's got some sort of brushwork to it. So it's letting you see what's underneath it. And if it lets you see what's underneath it, then it really matters what's underneath it. It's going to affect the overall read of the piece. Okay, so a couple of lines over here, just to kind of indicate some shadow shapes for myself. And maybe one little separation of light and dark right over here. I don't tend to stress on this kind of thing. I just want roughly locate the separation of light and dark right over there. And maybe I roughly locate the separation of light and dark for maybe the whole mouth region. But beyond this, I think I'm perfectly content. I'm just kind of drawing some larger shapes right now on the face. So again, I do things in terms of block-in. I don't particularly right now do too much line work for the very beginning. Depends on how you want to do it, of course, and it'll overall have an effect on the accuracy of this portrait. But again, I'm doing these portraits for trying to verify certain things that I've learned recently. I'm not really doing it to get exact reads. So in that mind, I'm keeping things quite loose. Okay, so we have some shapes right now kind of blocked in, and now we can begin to start layering things in within these shapes. So this is the overall block in. There's not too much in terms of detail, but that's fine. I can always put in information later on if I need to. Let's pick some colors out, because this is the fun part of the painting. Now we get to do some swatching. Now we get to do some ideas behind kind of putting the piece into practice. So how are we going to translate this piece? Really, really big and important question. So we're not going to draw things 1:1. That would be pointless. So again, what is going to be the logic of this piece? First off, I want to put green somewhere in this piece, and I want to have a temperature change in this piece. So what's going to really help us with that idea? The notion of putting green is a problem, because that green is going to tend to warm up a lot of things. If I have, for example, warm here and warm here, well, that kind of kills my color contrast. So this is what we're going to do. We'll pick something like an orangish yellow for the light areas. So something approximating right over here. So we can pick something maybe around there for the light areas. That seems perfectly fine, right? And maybe a little bit more yellow as well, and more saturation. That can be our light value over there. And for the shadow values, let's pick a derivative greenish blue, and that could be our shadow color right there. I think that'll work quite well. Okay, so let me just actually, we'll invest in this little idea really quickly. I'll paint that little blue here. Of course, you want to keep it more within the realm of possibility on the face. You always kind of want to bring it more towards that warm. But those are going to be my base kind of colors for the entire piece, okay? So we'll add a tertiary color, especially where it is necessary. In certain areas, it's going to have to be here, which is going to be perhaps something like this. Just a kind of deepish red, like that. That'll be my tertiary. And right now, I'm not trying to make any strong decision when it comes to saturation. We're just going to start layering general notions of temperature. So we'll have a light down there. As I get closer and closer to the face, of course, this is where I kind of decide how light my lights are going to be as well. But I'm going to have this general idea of, this is going to be my light value. See that on the top right? That's light value. That's going to be a light value specifically now. Now this is the cool thing. Specifically, light value on the forehead. So we'll have a similar value like this, but because it's the cheek, I'm going to bring it down towards the red. I'm going to add more reddish ideas over here. Maybe not so much, maybe about that much. We'll just test some things out. That's okay. Like I said, general temperature is all I care about right now. So if I get that general temperature right, I'm swimming quite clean. And for the bottom, I'm going to bring it even further down. I'll desaturate it. And I'm going to bring colors like this into the fray. So it's not crazy amounts of change. You see the colors almost blend in with each other. That's the kind of point, because the transitions on the face are not going to be super, super strong. And of course, I want to bring some of these beautiful, beautiful deep red transitions. I want to bring that in this area as well. Always good to kind of have just a general notion of what the temperatures are going to be on your piece before you start. So I'm kind of just putting in areas that I know they're going to go for, and then I can kind of use those colors to kind of fill out the rest of the piece. So right now what I'm doing is I'm kind of giving myself some mental notes here, some visual notes of what I want to put in certain areas. So we have some green, we have some yellow, we have some red. Let's double down on the green idea. Let's have some bluish green, darker ideas on this little coat here. So we'll translate the color. See, what we're doing right now is we're filtering things in our brain. We're filtering what we see. So we'll go darker, we'll go a bit more green, a bit more darker green, and we just use this color. And we can just fill things out. Again, I don't really care too much about the value, relative value that is. I do care a lot about the temperature. So just notions of value, notions of temperature. We're not doubling down on anything. It's almost like if you were drawing something traditionally. Amster, how's it going, man? If you're drawing something traditionally, you would never ever just start with the hardest possible pressure with your hands, right? You kind of give yourself a little bit of room. So perhaps what you would instead do is you would paint something lightly, and then if you like what you saw, then you would double down and you would say, okay, I really like the way that looks, so I'm going to double down and I'm going to put more pressure on my pen, for example. And that's kind of the idea we're playing around with. Right, we don't want to make any strong commitments because that gives us a stronger read than we're kind of looking for. Get some green right there. For the pink, I think maybe we'll just have a direct transition or translation. It's pink in light, so it needs to be lighter. Again, I can always affect this read later on, and we'll have a darker value of the pink. I don't want this to be too dark, otherwise it gives me too much of a read down here. Definitely want things to be up here in the face. Probably going to have a similar value to the neck down here, a nice beautiful desaturated yellowish orange value in the neck, and then we can just continue the drawings easily. So right here it'll transition into, again, goes cooler, goes darker. So this is where we kind of figure out some of our information here. Now the entire painting is not under a very stark lighting condition, which is really important to kind of realize, because what that means is that we're not going to have a crazy difference when it comes to the overall values. Canvas has a gun, so we're not going to have a crazy difference in the overall value. Can you or one of the mods ping everyone on Discord? If one of the mods could do it, that's fine. I don't really care if that's not being done as well. It's just more of a relaxing stream for me. So if there's less people, it's also fine. I don't particularly mind. For the hair, again, so when hair is the question to be asked, right? Really important to realize that the hair is going to be against the skin. So if the skin in general is going to be this kind of desaturated yellowish for the majority of the highlights, for example, then what I want to do is I want to introduce some amount of color contrast. So I have two decisions to make. So this is going to be my general location of the skin color. I can go here, have it against a warmer against cooler contrast, so the hair is going to be warmer. Or I can go here, hair is going to be cooler. So we have a bit of a decision making. Also, I can have a saturation contrast. I can bring the saturation up. I'll do a combination of both of them. So we'll bring it down here. We'll bring it darker. We'll have a value like that, I think. That could easily be something that we could explore. That's the value that we have. I think that looks okay. We can maybe invest some time into this idea. Maybe it'll lead us somewhere. But again, the general temperature, all I care about is that being right. So in a different world, we could even have this kind of color on there, and that could easily be, you could easily see that working, right? Maybe we'll even use the same color for the shadows. Shadows go a lot cooler. But again, so we're just gonna block stuff out. We don't care too much, right? We don't care too much about getting exacts at this point. Don't ever kind of get bogged down with this notion of painting exacts. It's not maybe the best when it comes down to getting a good painting at the end of the day. Just stick with best notions, best intentions, and it should eventually lead you down a good path. Towards the outer side, so the shadows on the inner side are going to be redder because it's against skin. Disintegrate, how's it going? How's it going, Nick? It's good to see you as well. Thank you for the compliment. So the inner side is going to be redder. So for example, these shadows over here, eventually perhaps in one world or the other, we would have a bit more of a redder value like that. a deep, beautiful red value. Same thing down here, by the way, deep, beautiful red value could be silhouetting the face. Because it's against skin, right? And it's on one of those internal angles. But when I have this external darkness over here, for example, these ones over here, they're sort of pointing out that way. So I'm going to interpret it. Again, this is a big issue of interpretation. We're going to interpret it as cooler, okay? Because the overall background is somewhat desaturated, right? Somewhat yellow. So we're going to do, maybe we'll just do that. We'll darken it and we'll desaturate it. So ultimately, what's the idea here, right? What do we end up with? Well, what we end up with is that these two darks are different. You see that? They are contrasted with each other. And that gives me more dynamic range in the piece. Really important to me to kind of have that, because I don't want things to look too static and I don't want things to look too familiar when I put in these shadows. So really, really important to me to do that. Okay, so we can continue on. So blocked in means, think about the big. So again, I'm going to put a light value in here. We'll say that this is my light value right down here. But again, it's near the face. So it's not just going to be a lighter variation of skin. We're going to add one more element, one more variable to that equation. We're going to say it is a lighter element of the skin that is in the area where the eyes, nose, and mouth is, the face plate. So what's going to happen is we're going to deepen it towards the warmer. And we're going to add a bit more notions of red towards it, right? In an alternate universe, we could even add some pink over here. It's totally fine. But ultimately, we want to have more of a red notion. Currently, it's right over there. So I'm going to bring it down. I'm going to lighten it. We can even desaturate, to be honest. It's also perfectly fine. So I want to just play around with this a little bit. There you go. I think that's the color that I want. You see how beautiful that looks? And again, these are both light areas, right? So we have the idea of light. Down here, for example, we bring it up, we can bring it down, and then we have this light value up there. And now we can slightly make them coordinate, maybe slightly bring down the overall temperature to let them harmonize. But this is the idea, right? That's basically how I'm going to go about picking my highlight values, or my area of light values. Down here, same thing. So I'm thinking about these in terms of the zones of color, basically. So things over here go towards the yellows, the ochres. Things over here go towards the reds, goes towards the warmer tones. And things over here goes towards slightly desaturated reddish tones, something a bit cooler. So down here, for example, we'll go along with that idea. So something a bit cooler can be down here. It can also be down here, right? Because going more desaturated gives me more cooler values, right? So that's over there currently a cool. Even though it's like a grayish value, because of the way the color works, color theory works, that's also cool. Alternatively, we could just select something like this, maybe, you know? You want to go really cool. That's also possible, all in that kind of effort to try and get more of a color variance on the face, because we don't want one static color everywhere. So I'm going to add a couple of strokes here on the side of the mouth right over there. And for this highlight, let's just choose this pink highlight and we'll just desaturate and drop it slightly. And we'll end up with this color over here. And it'll be a suitable base. Arguments can be made. Why is the color not so beautiful? Why is it so, it's a little bit more dismal compared to the other ones? And I agree with you, but the idea is that it needs to be kind of dismal because I want to have this area be more of the focus. So maybe I'll bring it up later, but this is the decision for later, not for right now. We're okay right now. So again, I'm gonna just choosing the colors in those easy to pick areas, these long sweeping areas, ones that are very simple for me to kind of find out. And the ones that aren't so simple, we'll deal with later, right? Because we don't have to just take on the difficulty head on in this piece. We can be very, very careful with our decisions over here. Over here near the glabella, we're gonna take the same kind of pink value, we'll drop it down. So again, you see a lot of my color decisions are being affected by what's already on my canvas, right? Because I want things to coordinate. I don't want high contrast, be it in value or in color. Mel, how's it going? Good to see you. All right, so same kind of deal on the right-hand side. We can potentially make a claim and say that, okay, well, right-hand side is slightly darker than left-hand side, which is true for areas like this and this, but not so much for other areas. Also a question, if this is blue, why is this not blue? Again, the idea is that we don't just simply take shadow value, shadow color, we take shadow value for sure, so the values are going to be coordinated, but the colors, well, no, the colors are not going to be coordinated. The colors depend on the local context. And that's the big deal with this kind of painting, right? That's what gives us like interesting little colors on the piece, right? Because we could easily have painted everything really homogeneous, but we're not going to do that, right? Because we want a piece that ends up like this master study over here, right? We want a lot of variation. You know, it really gives us that. It makes the painting your own, basically. It makes the painting way your own. Makes it more like a painting, less like you know, just reference manipulation. So again, so these darks over here, down here, really, really useful for us because we can play around with the structure of those darks to get good silhouette in the face, but we can just continue here quite casually. So I'm just gonna just throw around and play around with some of these shapes. So I don't have nearly enough shapes to start playing around just yet, but I have enough to just start to put some amount of fill. So this is kind of awkward, like the entire process is a little bit awkward maybe, for people that are used to just filling everything in with a base color, filling everything in with the shadow colors, then the light colors. So a little bit more, maybe less controlled, less pipeline version. It's still very, very pipeline and ordered, but if you're not familiar with the way that it's ordered, things can look a little bit awkward at every stage. But you're just gonna have a lot of trust in the process, right? It's just people use this kind of process every single day, and I have a lot of trust in it, and I've seen a lot of good results. So I'm just gonna go with that idea. So it's very, very often the case that you're gonna be doing, dude, you scared the shit out of me with that alert. But very often is the case that in the middle of the painting we can easily lose out on some of our fervor, right? Or some of our ability to just push forward can easily be lost. But I think just having a lot of faith in your process always going to help out. So this value over here on the cheek, super creeps. Cheers, man. Thanks, mate. Thanks for the follow. So now it's a question of comparison. So I could easily just do this, you know, I could just grab that value from the left-hand side, and I could push it towards the right. Because really, really important to coordinate your ideas. A couple of reasons for doing that. Number one is it makes you faster, right? Because no longer do I have to make specific decisions for every single area on my canvas. I don't have to do that anymore. I can just make decisions for one area, and then every similar area gets the same kind of idea in there. For example, if I solve the notion of what is the highlight color on the cheek, then whenever I have a value or I have an area on my drawing which is similar, for example, the highlight of the nose, I can simply sample this value and I'll put it here. These two things coordinate, my light source temperature is solved, my value coordination is solved. It does a bunch of things that are very, very useful to us. So really worth considering doing this kind of thing, right? So try and reuse. A good person that teaches reuse, very, very great artist, James Gurney, great YouTube channel, very, very solid painter. I would consider him a master painter of our day and age. Incredible work. Definitely go check him out if you haven't already, if you're not familiar. But again, now we're just going to complete the drawing. So again, same idea of reuse, value up there, for example. I can push it down here. So I can grab the same value, I can push it down here. So you see how everything's starting to coordinate with each other? Get everything nice and easy. Doesn't have to be a struggle, right? So I kind of picked the lighting conditions, I picked the colors that I was going to choose in those easy areas. And now that I have it in those easy areas, I can simply complete the painting. Simply complete the general idea, the general block. So I'm painting things very, very blocky. Can I just pause the timer? Maybe it's useful if I just kind of drag in some little in-betweens of this painting. Just so people have a bit more context. I feel like it'll be more helpful. Because I do have in-betweens. I very rarely have in-betweens. Clarity, good to see you. So I very rarely have in-betweens on my work because I tend to work on one layer and I work very quickly. But I do have some on this piece because I wanted to post it on Instagram. So maybe I can just pull that up, or maybe the entire file is somewhere. Just to kind of give you a look-see. What resolution are you using for this? This is 2000 by 2000, semi-cropped, I believe. The reason you can see so many pieces on the side is that's a feature of the program that I use. I don't use Photoshop, I use something called krita. And krita has a feature called referencing, where you can just place a static image outside your canvas space, and it works just fine. 2K by 2K, generally speaking, is not a very usable, it's not very usable for prints and things like that. It's very small. If you're an artist that does prints, consider, well, it depends on how large you're printing at, but maybe something around 300 dpi would be good. And you know, just put the number of inches on your print format to the appropriate amount. All right, let's look at this really quickly, maybe. So I do think I still have my in-betweens. There you go, that's a reference to the side of it. But every little thing over here. So these are all individual layers, by the way, because again, I paint basically everything on one layer. So we're at this stage right now, you see? There's a bit of a coordination, right? You see that little comparison right there? So we're at this stage. Also, I love painting darker skinned people because the saturation you can get on darker skinned people is so beautiful. Anyway, so we're gonna get into this stage. This is like primary blocking stage. So the colors, secondary blocking stage, tertiary, and then you know, find little details and little tweaks towards the end. So that's basically what we do. This painting, I think, took me, what is it? I think 95 minutes yesterday night. We're just doing similar thing right now. So it's really easy to kind of remember structure. Not as structured as just outlining everything, but it's something to consider, right? It's one of the ways you can do a painting. So this method is developed based on my studies of some other oil painting artists. mainly John Lariva, incredible artist, big fan of his work. That's where we're at right now, okay? Just so you get an idea, so we're not just like doing things and nobody knows where it fits into stuff. Because you don't want to have that idea that it'll magically go towards a finished piece, right? The whole rest of the owl effect going to be a little bit of a problem, so you got to be a little bit careful. Russell Stewart, welcome. Good to see you, buddy. Go follow Russell Stewart, phenomenal painter. Also works in traditional medium. I believe it's oils, isn't it? Been doing a lot of portraits, I feel like, for his stream lately. Been really cool to see. I see it on your page and also see it on Jets' Instagram story. He's a big fan of your work. Always talks about it, and always a big fan of hearing about it because it is good work. Generally got a tablet, so I need to learn. Well, I don't think I talk about too many tablet-specific things in here, but if you have any questions, I'll try to do my darnest to try and solve them. But yeah, welcome. Always good to see you. All right, so again, we have some general ideas already picked out, but my entire process is heavily geared towards just working traditionally. So one layer, everything is quite simple. I love oils. I'm slowly learning how to use them. I also have a lot of appreciation towards oils. The financial aspect of it is a bit prohibitive right now, but most of the people that have taught me how to draw, or rather most of the people I've learned from, rather, I've never had formal art instruction, but most of the people that I've learned from are usually all painters because I just love the style. And most of my influences, like Velázquez, like Duran, like Sargent, Rembrandt, you know, most of them are oil painters, so gotta go somewhere in that direction. Why I'm interested in your digital stream? Well, cheers, I appreciate that. Just applying a little bit of tooth to it. One of the biggest issues you will find, Russell, when painting things in digital is that we lack some of the organic mark making that traditional has. So if you want to kind of emulate your traditional work, it's going to be important that you play around with a bunch of brushes. I would not start that way, however. I would never start out that way because you want to keep things nice and simple because you are not an amateur by any means. So for you, it's more like you're trying to find out the tools you require to get the goal that you see in your head. That's going to be the biggest thing you're trying to accomplish on your canvas. So in that end, I would keep things remarkably simple in your first few paintings, in your little first initial forays into digital painting. Keep things really simple, singular brush, all that kind of stuff. Be very conservative with your tools, be conservative with your layers, just be nice and simple. Also, we're overcomplicating because I'm talking while I do this, but just be really simple. So again, let's talk about logic a little bit for pieces. When you have certain colors selected, when you have certain ideas on your piece, you can start to replicate those ideas in different areas. For instance, we know that some forward left-facing planes in this piece get that highlight, get that particular kind of color.
Oh, fuck. I can't believe you've done this.
So we can just select maybe a little bit of an interpolation of that color right over there. And since this plane over here, which is the plane directly under the lacrimal caruncle, I believe that's called the lateral cartilage of the nose, that and this little area on the side of the mouth, that's called, I believe, the orbicularis oris, that is basically the similar kind of facing plane. So if I have a similar value available to me, then I can just simply put that value in there. That's like logic of the piece. If you're wondering how to kind of figure out which planes are similarly pointing, definitely do your Asaro studies. Do a bunch of Asaro studies. Asaro, I will never ever stop swearing by it. Legitimately has completely changed the way that I think about portraiture, and really big fan of using it. Any sort of breakdown will do you fine though, whether you break it down to Loomis, if you understand planes while using Loomis, or if you break it down to a Riley method, just fine, and whatever Bridgman recommends, you can do it that way as well, perfectly fine. I'm interested in doing the exact same thing. Well, good. I am definitely interested in doing the same thing as well. Big fan. So, question of managing saturation is a big deal, right? Because we can't kind of hide behind the idea that, oh, well, this piece is desaturated, it's a desaturated piece, so I'm going to be painting desaturated. It's a pretty terrible kind of hill to die on for pieces because you don't want to satisfy yourself with a piece that didn't go the distance, right? You want to kind of go through the full possible spectrum of what could potentially be possible on the piece. So we don't want to just settle for second best. What that means, generally speaking, is that don't rely heavily on your reference. Don't let your reference restrict you while you paint. Big problem, right? We don't want to be slaves to a reference. This is why a lot of what I do right now is interpretation. We took time out in this piece. This is a time piece, but we took time out of this piece to just think about what am I going to do over here? How am I going to translate these ideas? Because ultimately, every art piece that you ever do is going to be an expression of yourself, right? There's no two ways about it. It's all going to be you on a canvas. But something people, I think, fail to remember, and I personally am a victim to this all the time, something we fail to remember is, what is it we're trying to do here, right? Like, what is the idea? Why are we painting this? What is it in this particular piece that's really standing out to us? Like Schmidt. So Richard Schmidt, great artist. So he talks about this a lot. He says, what is it that what is the key? What is the statement of the piece, right? What is the point of the piece? What are you trying to say with this particular piece? I'm not trying to say that every piece needs to have some sort of socio-economic commentary, but the idea is that what stood out to the piece, right? What is the piece about, is how you always see it said. What is it about to you? To me, it's about the paleness, right? It's about this perfect framing of the face. But in that regard, it's not totally about it being just bland. I feel like there's so much life to the paleness. So I'll excessively bring out that life through the choices that I make in color. And that's my idea. Same thing over here, right? For this portrait over here, my choice was, I really loved the saturation that I saw. Little mild, heavy saturation on the shadow side. So I built the entire piece around that. I chose the background color slightly because of that. I chose a beautiful warm for the light to really up that idea to bring out those beautiful cool reds. And that's the idea, right? And I think thinking in this particular manner has been quite useful, has been quite helpful to just kind of push my pieces to more of a painting than just a study. Every single medium that a person plays around with will definitely help each piece of art they make ultimately. I believe so anyway. I agree. I have learning a lot from each streamer. Yeah, ultimately art is art, right? To a certain degree, art is just art. Recently I've been more informed about the idea that it could be useful for ideation to work in different mediums, just because the incidentalness will be different. I've seen a lot of concept artists working in clay or in watercolor, or they'll switch from marker to something like ink or Copic, and that's quite useful for them. So being somebody that's going to go into concept art quite soon, actually, pretty useful for me to think about that. Check out Lumpy Touch. He does very similar stuff to this. Cool, I should check him out. Why would I want to check him out when I'm here? Wait, are you Lumpy Touch? Music Cut? Alright, so again, let's not dilly-dally. See how that color contrast of the lips? We like that, so I want to bring that out a bit more. So the general temperature of those lips, always an interesting question. What is the first stroke you make? It doesn't really matter if it's on the canvas, but just generally speaking, what is the first stroke you make to kind of define a form? It's not as difficult as we kind of sometimes make it. It's simply a matter of, I think, personally getting relative value fairly accurately and getting the relative temperature fairly accurately. And that's, I think, all that I really care about. Temperature and color. Temperature and, value. Because, of course, we're painting realistically, so value is one of the biggest things to us. I wouldn't say that value is one of the biggest things to painting in general. I feel like that is a mistake. That's slightly insular of a mindset to keep. But definitely in the context of realistic painting, value is one of the cornerstones, right? You can't really get away from it. In general, if you're wondering what my thoughts are, I would say shape is maybe the most important thing, besides just overall proportion. But that's probably how I would place my hierarchy. A little bit of light right there. But again, a good amount of knowledge about the planes of the things will serve you on every single thing that you do, every single portrait that you do. And just thinking more planar, just thinking more about the planes of what you're drawing, can be immensely, immensely useful. Makes painting look so easy, because painting is not that hard, dude. It's not that hard. I think don't put it on a pedestal. It's just a skill like anything else. Like if you said I want to train how to be a rock climber, I would say, okay, well, I think you can do it. And if you say I want to be a painter, I would say, okay, well, I think you can do it. It's just a skill, you know. Just put the hours in, be attentive. You can learn it, right? You can learn it. It's all learnable. You know, I kind of like this value that's down here. Only one slight issue with it is a little bit too dark. Again, the shadows and the lights need to be well defined. It's called separation of light and dark, and it's a really, really important aspect of painting things realistically, right? Because we don't want to have too severe of a read. Because what is the principle behind putting value in a piece, right? What is the principle? Why is there a value like this? So why is there value in general? Why do we say value is important for paintings? Because value tells you how the planes of your object are reacting to the incident light, right? It's fairly simple. That's all it tells you, right? And it's pretty important because if, for example, you use too harsh of a value contrast, you're telling the viewer that there's much harsher of a plane break. Just to point this out, for instance, just to explain this maybe a bit more visually, because it's really important. It's something that's been pointed out to me in my initial work. But the idea is like this. So if the difference between this and this, when you look at it from the front, right? What is the difference? The front view of these two objects. One is this cube, for example, and one is a hemisphere. So from the front, if I just take a cross-sectional area, so one is just like this, right? It just goes into darkness. And if it was tilted slightly, if it was tilted slightly, you could see a little bit of that top plane. It would see lightness to darkness, and there would be very little in terms of transition. But for this one over here, for this little curved surface, how do I indicate that? Well, there'll be a much more gradual shift between these values, right? Way more gradual to kind of give you that spherical look. So sort of remember what you were communicating when you're putting these values in. So I got a crit by ArtGerm very early on when I started learning how to paint again. And this is what he told me. He said, you have a good eye for painting already, you have a good eye, but your value transitions that need to be taken care of. It's a bit too severe, a bit too harsh for value transition. Also a bit, just to talk about something different for a time being, talked about value enough. But the idea about measurement over here, measurement humongously important. Please do not ever skimp out. Do not ever skimp out with your measurement, really important. So with the general idea of measurement on a piece, I think it's fairly important to kind of think about, you saw me kind of sample colors, by the way. I don't give myself too much of an opportunity to just linger. So I sampled once, I'm sorry, not sampled, but I tested once, twice, and then I said, you know what, I'm going to go with that value. Because if this painting is going to fail, it's not going to fail because of this. It's going to fail because something over here, the actual focus of the painting. You will find that you can get away with straight murder down here in the piece. You could easily do something that is completely wrong off your reference, and nobody's ever going to bring it up to you. This is one of the liberties that you have, the area of focus on your piece. A true experience and practice, you put it in the hours. You put in the hours, yes indeed. Mileage is what separates me and you, what separates me and Nathan Fawkes and Noah Bradley and Russell Stewart, the greatest painters of our age. That's the kind of idea. James, how do you get so much confidence? I don't think I'm very confident. I mean, I speak confidently and I carry myself confidently, but I don't think it's all that important. It's a strange question to ask, to be sure. But I guess I'm just realistic with what my my wants and my concerns are. Maybe that's the key to just carrying yourself with a little bit of confidence, because otherwise you might easily find yourself worrying about things that don't particularly matter and having them influence you. But for me in general, I really understand at this point in my life, I'm really, I'm very, very certain about the things that I value, that I really enjoy, that kind of define who I am. So when things that aren't those things I encounter in my day-to-day life, I don't ever find that it affects me at all, because I already know, right? It's almost like I have a checklist in my brain. Like, is this particular thing going to affect me? Well, no, because it's not A, B, or C, and it always helps me a lot. But in general, if you're not confident, I'm assuming you're talking about this in the concept of painting. For painting in particular, just put in the hours, try and be more intentional. Don't give yourself nearly as much leeway. I think really important. So I've definitely put in a lot of hours to try and up my stroke intention. However, it's kind of gone down the drain a little bit, just because I stream art, and I stream art with very consistent, constant commentary. And sometimes that really affects me, depending on how, for example, when Russell came into the stream, I had to say something, I had to hit him with that good shit, so that he stays and it doesn't just leave me in the dirt. So at that point, my painting kind of suffered a little bit, because I had to talk a little bit more than I was painting. I'll check you out later. I was just popping in to say hi. Hi, Erica. It's always good to see you. I hope your day's going all right. Yeah, but in general, in life, honestly, it's a difficult question to answer. Personally, I just faked it till I made it, because I was bullied a lot when I was in school, which is probably should have been, because I was a big fat annoying kid. When I got to college, I was fairly witty already, because I had to fight against so many people that were stronger than me. But then I hit the gym and I realized what my passions are, where I truly lie as a person, and then things got a lot more easier for me, I feel like. Just not worrying too much about things that don't really matter or don't affect me. Maybe that's what it is, Not a life coach, though. I try to fancy myself as a drawing instructor one day or the other. But I do talk a lot, so maybe that's ultimately what I can introduce myself as. You done good? Okay, well, good. Okay, anyway, so we're just kind of completing the drawing. Again, I rapidly reduce my amount of focus, because I'm not somebody that has an incredible amount of focus to begin with. I have a lot of patience when it comes to painting, but when it comes to streaming and when it comes to kind of fulfilling a certain deadline on my piece, I will sort of structure it so that I don't care too much about certain things. So some of the things I don't care about, for example, this neck, the temperature, if that's okay, I'm all right. I'm all right if the temperature's all right. So I'm just going to grab this little shape over here. So I have quite a few bits of information on my canvas. One thing that I'm somewhat lacking here is a strong, saturated focal element that I usually like putting on my pieces. You don't need them to be there, but it's good if they are there. So before I do that, let's just do some rearranging, right? So we added a bunch of things onto a canvas, a bunch of things. What are things? Shapes, values. No edges just yet. I haven't strongly put anything for edges, but let's try and harness the power of what we just did. Because again, if anything is failing on your canvas, really important to understand that it's mostly because of complexity that it's failing. Because if it was incomplete and it was controllable, it becomes part of your process. But if it's incomplete and you perceive it as uncontrollable, it becomes something like a mistake to you, right? You get worried about it. So just to kind of avoid that idea, really good that if ever you kind of hit a block in your painting, if something is just not working out, just simplify, man. Grab a big fat brush and start just throwing shit around like a chimp. Just go crazy. Really important. It's really saved a lot of paintings in recent times for me. Because not everything you're going to paint is going to be easy. Really important to consider the fact that, you know, it's not always going to be a straightforward portrait. Maybe it's a dynamic angle, maybe it's a subject you're not familiar with. And that's what's going to contribute to a lot of variance in general to all of your work. And there's a very natural thing, by the way, when it comes to painting. Always be ready to face it. And I feel like when you're a painter that does a lot of work, you kind of just grow a very good skin against variance. You don't care about it as much. But if you don't paint very regularly, just don't worry about it. If you're just a casual painter, don't worry about the fact that one piece looks better than the other, even though it's the piece you did before is better than the piece you're doing right now. Think about the averages. That's what I did when I first started learning again. I thought about the averages. On average, the 5 pieces I did this week, are they better than the 5 pieces I did last week? And the answer is yes, then I'm doing good. If the answer is no, then I need to do some serious reevaluation. Iris, how's it going? Beastie, how's it going, dude? Good to see you. Again, the lighting needs to be a little bit more sensible over here. So we're not just going to light it up a little bit in specific areas. Again, knowing your anatomy, knowing your structure is always going to be good here. This little area over here, you want to not go home with a girl at parties. It's called the zygomatic bone right there. Goes into the zygomatic arch. It's your cheekbone. Great little area. Machiavelli, good to see you. So really, really good thing to remember if you like. Your zygomatic bone, not just exclusive to humans. I've done studies on horses, on tigers, lions, various cats and dogs, wolves, elephants, hippopotamuses. All of them have zygomatic bones. So kind of just knowing something really well, you can almost leverage it. Like I have a pretty decent grasp of human anatomy, especially for muscular males, which is what I've drawn for most of my life. So I can draw those big gachi-based males fairly easily. So with that said, I can rotate a male basically any angle I want. Girls a little bit harder, and skinny people, fat people, a little bit harder for me because I don't really understand truly how everything sits, but I'll get better. It's very clear about where my visual library starts and ends. Also, BC, good job on that portrait, by the way. I think BC did a portrait of... Who was it? It was the guy from Guardians of the Galaxy. Star-Lord. My favorite pickup line is, "Hey baby, you have a beautiful zygomatic bone." How's that working out for you? Again, be consistent with your lighting, because light is what's going to give you a lot of the color variance. The lighting on top of here, it indicates that it is somewhat warm, somewhat yellow, with a local color of something reddish. So think about your color theory. What does it leave you with? Both of them are generally warm, which means it can generally stay towards the reddish yellows. It's a light source, so it's a light area, so it needs to go lighter. Ultimately, we end up with something roughly around here. We test it, maybe a little bit lighter. We test it, and it looks okay for the time being, right? Again, it looks okay for the time being. That's basically the process that goes behind choosing every color. Because there's a lot to think about, right? And the more you think about, the more it's going to have a very palpable effect on your painting. So do you need to think about everything though? Pops, welcome. Do you need to think about everything while you paint? Well, not really. Consider the paintings from antiquity. Consider very, very old fresco paintings, for example. Well, those paintings, they were not really done with too much of a notion, especially those egg tempera fresco area, the Gothic era paintings. Well, those people didn't really know too much about fundamentals of light because they don't include too much bounce in their paintings for the majority of the ones that I've seen. So it leads to this very interesting kind of look. It's very like clinical look to every painting, right? And it's really worth kind of exploring, right? So what do you want to do? So ultimately, we have all of these tools, right? As a beginner, you just try to do as much as you can, whenever you can. You try to learn all of these different fundamentals. What program is it? This is Krita, K-R-I-T-A. It's in the title, at least it should be. But as a beginner, we learn all of these various fundamentals. We try to assess the how of everything. How do I do this? How do I do that? How is this shaped? How is this rendered? And this is the idea. But then later on, when you become an intermediate or towards your advanced, what you request, then it shifts. It shifts to what do I want to do now? I know all of these things, but what do I want to do now? That's like the really interesting part of painting, right? Then it really depends on who you are and how you want to translate that idea. R.I.P. wrong. Sad days. It's alright, I forgive you this once. So anyway, just gonna play around with some shapes really quickly.
I can't believe you've done this.
Thanks, Bella Bamboo. Appreciate the follow. I'm gonna lurk here and steal some information if you don't mind. Grab a seat. Also, again, really important to consider your planes of the face. It's really cool, man. Like, it's just really interesting of a subject to just learn what the planes of the face are. It'll really assist you tremendously. I cannot stress it enough how much it'll help you with painting, just to know what the breakdown is. Maybe we'll do a breakdown right now, just so you guys maybe kind of figure out what I'm talking about. I'll talk about this nose really quickly, right? Because, you know, we painted this nose in like, I want to say 25 strokes maybe so far, and then it's a bit of an overestimation. But let's just pause the timer. We'll just look at this really quickly. Actually, did I not unpause the timer before? Actually, I have no idea. I hope this is correct. I hope it was actually running. But this is the idea, right? So everything that you see has planes. So let's just hit tab really quickly, and a whole bunch of things happen. Let's grab a new layer. We'll talk about planes. Let me take a drink of water for this. Because this is monumentally important, man. If you're wondering how can I paint something in less strokes, well, this is really your answer. Okay, so first off, information. Where does it come from? So the information here is going to come from a couple of places. Number one, biggest thing, look at an Asara head. If you go to my Discord, or if you go to Maddie's Discord as well, then there is a resource posted by this little person over here. His name is Inner Glow. If you do not possess a physical Asara head, there's a great Asara head render that you can turn around, you can apply different lighting conditions to. I think it's good. Even if you have just a picture of an Asara head, that's what I use to learn a very high quality static picture. So what is an Asara in general? What does it mean? An Asara head, I can just show you. I can bring out my handouts if you'd like. But the Asara head is a very simplified structural representation of a head. And it is immensely important to maybe not memorize, but at least understand where different angles are coming from, right? So this is majorly a question of planes and structure. So what is a plane? A plane is an oriented surface, and everything that we draw is a combination of oriented surfaces. Makes things like cubes and spheres and cylinders and all these different things. So basically this is the idea. So if we are to understand where things are pointing, it doesn't matter where the light source is, because ultimately if I know where the light source is and if I know where something is pointing, then I know what value to put it on. Put on that particular shape, because all the shape is saying is this is where the object is pointed towards, and if something is pointed towards where a plane is pointing, then that's a certain thing gets light. If it's pointing the opposite direction, it gets shadow. And that's fundamental painting. That's structural painting. Really important. Cannot stress it enough. So now that this information is known to us, what do we do with it, right? Let's consider some just easy enough to think about planes. The eye is a fairly easy thing to start with. So we'll just look at it really quickly. So what are the planes of the eye as is generally understood these days? So the eye breakdown generally goes something like this. So we start over here with a beautiful left plane. And we transition into a front-facing plane and into a right plane. Remember, I'm not just drawing a finger in profile, right? Basically what this means is that this is pointing that way, which is pointing left, so towards the nose. This is pointing towards us, and this is pointing right towards the hair. Same thing down here, by the way. Down here and down here. That's one plane, so this is left facing, technically left down facing. Again, right facing, technically right down facing. And not just there, remember there's a big old eyeball behind all of this, and the eyeball itself has a left plane, a front plane, and a right plane. So let us consider what we just talked about, right? And how do we apply it towards our particular drawing? We look at this painting, even as long as the reference is fairly decent, you should be able to spot this in any direct light condition. So what's happening here? The lighting is coming from the left. How do I know? Well, when I first looked at this painting, I looked at some of the shadow shapes. Shadows, these are form shadows. There are two types of shadows in general, if you're curious. It's form shadows and cast shadows. Your cast shadows are usually the more telltale example, but again, they're form shadows over here, right over there, on the form of objects. So it's coming from the left. So if you told me there's light coming from the left, right? In this particular case, I believe it's left and in front, so front left. You said there's front left lighting coming on this piece. Please light this piece. Then I say, okay, fine, front left, I know my structure, this is what I expect, right? So that means that the front and the left planes are going to be lighter, and the right plane facing away from the light source is going to be darker, right? What do we see in real life, right? Same story. Front left planes are lighter, and the right plane is darker, right? Big deal. It's a really big deal. Same thing over here, right? The left facing plane is lighter, not as light because it's bottom facing, and the right plane is darker. You see how that works? Really important. That's exactly what we see. You see that those shapes I just drew on my painting? Same thing over here. See that? Left plane, front plane, right plane. Left facing plane, right facing plane. Right? This might seem a little bit too systematic, but it's a really big deal. Okay? And the way you break it down, because my breakdown is not exactly a Sorrow, it's based on a Sorrow, but it's not exactly a Sorrow. So my personal breakdown, a lot of it comes from this artist over here. His name is Marco Bucci, incredible YouTube personality painter, really big fan, great educator. And he has a workshop that I really encourage. I don't usually tell you to spend money, but if you're going to spend money on art stuff, spend money on, there's a workshop called Painting the Head, the first version, no, I'm sorry, the first chapter of that, chapter 1. I think there are 2 chapters as a whole. The first one is actually the structure. I'm sorry if you can hear dogs in the background, by the way. So chapter 1 is about the structure, and a lot of these breakdowns happen from those. Just so you know, Marco Bucci. The same thing goes with the nose, by the way. I can just do it for one more time. And it's worth kind of thinking about what these things are called as well. For example, on the eye, it's kind of simple, right? Lower eyelid, upper eyelid, and you have the little line right here. This area over here is called the lacrimal caruncle. If you want to lose some Chad points, regain your virginity status, that's called the lacrimal caruncle. Just an incredible word. If you put this into any rap battle, you win instantly. Anyway, that's your lacrimal caruncle, your tear duct, if you're not a Melvin. Same thing over here, by the way. So this is a simplified version. There's a right plane right over here. You see that little plane catching darkness over here because it's right facing, light coming from the left. This right facing plane, that's called, I believe, the right lateral cartilage of the nose. And we have this little ball of the nose, it's called the greater alar cartilage of the nose. And you have this little area, bridge, this little area over here, it's called the glabella, that's down facing, same idea on the right hand side. And we have some plane breaks over here, so it breaks right over here. So when I'm doing this, it almost seems like I'm just basically tracing over what's actually on my canvas. But remember, everything is consistent, it's all self-consistent. So we have a break right over there. We have a break down here because this is a spherical surface. Spherical pointed this way because it's like that. So it's not exactly spherical, it's like the tip of a Boeing jet. And then you have this little idea over here, this little namba. You have a bottom plane right over here. So this is a bit more complicated, of course. You have a bottom plane right over here. You have a left front-facing plane. You have a left plane. Same thing over here. And that's basically how you break the nose down. Why is this important? Because if the light is coming from the left, I expect light over here, for example. I expect shadow over here, I expect light over here, I expect light over here, I expect shadow over here. So that's basically what we see in the reference, right? What did I just say? Light over there, light over here, shadow over there, shadow over here, light over here, light over here. So same deal. And this is the idea that we kind of work with, okay? That structure, really important. Cannot stress that enough. If you know that, you can paint anything. The problem for me is, how do you think about all this stuff while you paint? Well, you just start really simply, right? Because, so the Asaro head itself gives you a clue about this. Before I restart my timer, we can talk about that. So you see the head itself, Nieskub, it's simplified on the left-hand side and it's more complex on the right-hand side. Perhaps what I can do is I can bring a more easily recognizable view here. So let's just grab the Asaro from the front, let's say. Right over there, right? Easy peasy. So there's something to consider, which is just levels of importance. You can call it structuring as well, depending on how you want to think about it. But you see how this left-hand side is way more simple than the right-hand side? That's how you think about it. You think about it in terms of what is the most important thing to do right now, or what is the larger idea right now. Because the larger idea is not that this particular divot in the front facing, bottom right facing area of the cheek is going to be bottom right facing. None of that nonsense. The idea is that this entire area is going to be left facing. This entire area is going to be left top facing. This entire area is going to be bottom facing. And then you kind of increase the resolution. You look deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and you get there towards the end of it, right? So I didn't start with kind of defining individual forms, right? Very, very simple. I'll give you a classic example of this. On a lot of oil paintings, what you will notice is that people will paint the nose with 3 values almost, right? Considering something like Rembrandt lighting. So you have a light value on this side, a dark value on this side, and you have a dark plane underneath. So you see what's happening here? Well, they're thinking about the greater image first. So solve the larger images, solve the larger planes, the larger, grosser image, and then sort of bringing it down. That'll reduce the amount of things that you need to think about, because no longer am I thinking about specifics. For example, in this particular piece, I have not even gotten to the eye yet, right? I've barely even gotten there. But I've structured the nose just now, this kind of thing. So I start with those big, big planes, and then I work my way inwards. Just like, for example, if you were doing a gesture drawing, because this is all linked, it's all linked. If you were doing a gesture drawing, you would not ever start with drawing the hand on a gesture drawing, would you? You would say, okay, well, let me get the gesture line first, right? Let me get that crazy gesture line, something like that, we'll get that first. And then we'll say, where's my head? Where's my torso, right? Where's my pelvis? And you say, okay, well, what's my secondary gesture line? The arm, right? It goes like that maybe. And then where's my deltoid? Where's my tricep? Where's my bicep? Where's my brachioradialis? Where's my elbow? Where's my forearm? All this other stuff. You work your way inward with my lats, my abs, my trapezius, spinal rectors, all that stuff. So you start simple and you work your way, deeper and deeper and deeper, and ultimately you end up with complexity. But most important thing, one of the very most important things in painting is the idea that paintings are not complex things. They are the summation of simple things. Because if the idea is I want to make this complex, you're going to paint it complex. But a lot of paintings, when you really look at them, they're just really well thought out, very simple statements that are collectively very gestalt, and they collectively are greater than the sum of their parts, right? This kind of idea. That's what a painting is. Very simple stuff. So worth thinking about, right? That's how I think I want to answer that question over there. All right, let's continue. Let's throw in a little bit of red here. Why is there red here, by the way? Because everything needs to be justified. At least to me, it needs to be justified. I'm a very justified sort of painter, Really want to have a notion of what I'm doing. So right over here, that's red because of the notion of subsurface scattering. Subsurface scattering, very, very beautiful, beautiful thing to study. Really, really important to study it as well. It'll give you a lot of life in your paintings. Fragment has a gun, but I think it's one of those really important things. I won't spend time on defining what it is right now, but it gives you this beautiful warming effect. And I think it's really, really important, especially when, for example, if I look at this piece and I gave it to somebody to crit and they said, James, you got to put more colors on here, man. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I want you to solve it yourself, but I want you to put more colors on here. And I would say, well, what are the available areas I can put color in? Maybe I can make the eyes more saturated, or I can make this area over here more saturated. I can just bring a line, a really beautiful dark red saturated line. I can bring it here, and nobody requested it. They would say, oh, that looks right. But what they need to say is, oh, that's subsurface scattering. I recognize that. You see how it all kind of plays into itself. It's really, really cool. One of my favorite parts about painting is that once you get the gross image right, you get to kind of just make decisions. You get to kind of make the idea of what do I want to kind of portray on this particular piece? What do I want to show in this particular piece? And then if you have good visual library and good mechanical ability, you can basically do whatever you want in some way and make it work, which is one of the coolest things about painting. Like if you like particular aspects of painting, likely there is somebody out there that has taken those aspects to the highest possible level, and I cannot stress enough the idea that you got to find who those people are. If you paint in a certain way and nobody else around you paints in the same way, and you just feel alone and you think it's okay, if you want to speed up your entire learning process, go find that person that's doing it at a high level, because I found people like that, right? Thankfully, I'm a very boring artist, right? I'm a very boring artist. I like the Sargent method. I like the utilitarian breakdown of the face. So for me, I don't have to look far. As I look at Sargent and say, okay, it turns out that one of the most famous American portrait painters of all time is somebody that I like painting like. So there's plenty of examples, but maybe it's not the same for you. Maybe you have different influences, maybe you have different styles of doing things. So if that's the case, then maybe really important is to just do a little bit of searching, right? Hunt certain people down. It's very unlikely that you are alone, and if you are alone, then chances are you might just be maybe delusional. I don't want to say that word, but because it's just been too much painting happening that nobody would do it. Maybe I haven't searched hard enough. Be a little more realistic with this. There you go. So kind of get that beautiful, lovely read on that nose, right? It really pops out just because we painted it very structurally. Now, of course, so this is for Muse Cup over there. So we started with some very simple little shapes on the nose. So now we can start to kind of delve a little bit deeper, right? Now I think about, okay, there's actually a plane in between here. So maybe this plane can go towards a slightly darker area. So again, from the big down to the small, and I have a little bit of a transition there. This kind of idea. Okay? And that's how you're gonna get these notions in the painting. Look at how cool that is. So again, I think the solution to too much complexity and is way too much to think about is just the structure. So I just got into design school, and when I first started learning design, one of the most common things that I was given in terms of advice is they said, well, don't try to do everything at the same time if you can't, right? Because ultimately our goal is to kind of get a successful piece out of it, right? I want to get something that I can use. So if that's the goal, then maybe the best thing for you to do is just to structure, just to order things much more systematically and say, okay, I'm not going to think about something until I need to think about it. So then that's a really interesting idea, right? So now I can just ignore certain parts about painting. For example, think about edges in this particular painting. I have barely thought about edges because I don't like thinking about edges when I'm doing blocking, right? Because if I think about edges, I kind of lose my strong kind of shape language or my strong notions of kind of capturing shapes. So it all has an impact because, for example, if I thought about edges earlier in this process, very likely I would end up with a different result, maybe a much more blended, a much more smoother, arguably better or worse or the same rate of piece, you know? It would be maybe somewhere in between. But this is the idea, right? So maybe just worth considering is that everything that you do on a canvas is going to have an impact, right? It's all going to have an impact, whether you want it or not. Because you can't take a piece started one way and then effectively finish it another way if time is a factor. If you have enough time, you just repaint the entire piece on top of the previous piece, right? Easy enough. But if time is a factor, you don't have that liberty. So for example, I'll give you a very common example of this. A lot of times when people give me crits, they give me a crit of something that's incredibly soft, and I say, okay, what you got to do over here is I want to add more hardness to this piece to get more of range in the edge space of the piece, right? However, that's a problem to overpaint on because sometimes it's just so soft and blurry that I basically have to just redraw the piece. That's a problem. I want to solve that. Be a little bit aware of this idea. Is that everything that you do is going to have an impact, right? For example, I used to paint a lot. It's another example of that. I used to paint and do a lot of my work with selection tool. Now, if anybody's getting started with digital, so Russell, I guess, if you're still in here, really beautiful and very impactful tool. Selection tool is very powerful. It lets you just get a shape instantly. There's no fuss, there's no muss, instant shapes. It's so important to me that I have it bound to one of my pen buttons, right? I have one button to get my quick wheel, and my other button is just for selection because it's that important, at least personally. And I feel like for a lot of growing artists right now, it's very important as well. But I could have done this entire painting with selection tool, and it would look completely different. And then it's worth considering. Do I want it to look that way? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But the idea is I should have the liberty to choose, right? I should have the ability to choose this, because you cannot just sit on a high horse as an artist and say, this is my process, there are many like it, but this one is mine. You can't say stuff like this. You want to have multiple processes. You just need to have it. Especially, if you're a casual artist, none of this applies to you, but if you want to be a professional, you can't just sit there and say, I'm going to paint in no other way except for this, right? It's ridiculous. Because what if that particular method, there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all when it comes to process, and I get that you're comfortable in it. However, really important to understand that maybe it's not effective for certain things. Maybe your workflow for drawing people is not the same or not as effective as it could be for drawing vehicles. Then it is mandatory that you switch, otherwise you become a less effective artist, and that's for a professional, that's a no-go. Also, see that little thing that I put in there? Again, more structure right there, more structure information. Basically, just solving structure is the majority of most of my pieces, because once I solve the structure, you know what I'm painting. You already know what I'm painting once I solve the structure. That's why some pieces can look really rough, but then you just know what the person's painting, right? You already know it. It's because they just sold most of the majority information. Sweet Calf, how's it going? Cheers, man. Thanks for the lurk. I do appreciate it. Thank you, Iris. I appreciate you as well. How's it going, Rami? Always good to see you. Thanks for the kind words on the Instagram. I do appreciate. You can find my work on there, by the way, if anybody is doing that Instagram thing. You can find it. It's not like I'm gonna really make people do, but if you want to do it, you can do it. It's there. Want to see some fast work? A couple little lines there. Very, very difficult for me to just like make a conscious effort to put lines in this piece, because sometimes it just feels wrong on a fully painted piece to just put lines randomly, because ultimately you want to be resolving a lot of things using just shape and value contrast. The notion is, the one size fits all rule of thumb is, well, lines don't exist in real life unless you're looking at a line, but lines don't exist in real life, right? There's no lines on a face, nobody's outlined, it's not into the Spider-Verse, you know? But sometimes things are very liney. So occlusions are a very liney thing, right? They can easily be very liney. Not a line, but very liney, if you get my meaning. Also, eyebrows, I do not respect them. I probably should, but I don't. By do not respect them, I mean I make very little attempt to be accurate with them. I think once I'm happy enough with them, I just continue on with my painting. Something to consider, by the way, on the topic of eyebrows, because there's always something to say, right? Because we remember a lot, at least we try to remember a lot about the things that we do. A little note about eyebrows is that it's a classic example, a very, very good example of the idea that shapes can have multiple edges, right? So the eyebrow, just observe the reference really quickly. The eyebrow over here has hard edges right over there, but has fairly soft edges right over there. But it's the same shape, right? To break down the shape, this would be the shape that you think about. But soft there, hard there, and that makes all the difference when it comes to realistically painting, right? So you kind of see what's going to happen to the piece really quickly. It goes from this to something like that. And even though it's just trash to your painting right now, this is just some of the worst things that I've ever done in my life. But even then, it still kind of adds something that's missing to the piece. I think that's important. Right? Absolute trash to your painting there. Just the draftsmanship went out of the window, but still adds something to the painting. That's just how powerful it is. And the idea is, Indian, why aren't you going back and fixing it? It's fine. It's fine. If it bothers me later, I'll fix it later. But again, everything in its due time, right? I really do like, and this is actually something I've seen before. I love this little shape on the nose. It's actually very pleasing to me to look at. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to amplify the effect of it, because sometimes I want to just slightly change that statement. So we can change statements all the time. Maybe it's okay the way that it is. Just a little experimentation. Maybe a little bit more red there. Just to be a little bit stronger with that statement. When I say statement, what do I mean? I mean, what do you want to focus on in this piece? Because you can't focus on everything, right? Going back to the previous discussion, what is the painting about, right? What is it about? What are you trying to say with this piece? What are you trying to bring into reality with this particular piece, right? What's the idea? So I can maybe manipulate that by playing around with color and value and all these various beautiful things to play around with. Okay, let's just fill some stuff in here. So now that I have some secondary shapes in, I start bringing in some notion of edges, some slight notions, not too much, but some slight notions. What does that mean? For instance, right over here on some of these shadow shapes on the far side of the face, maybe I want to do a little bit. Well, I can do both at the same time, because I want to edit these shapes a little bit. So maybe bring it more downwards, for example. It's a bit of shape editing. Maybe bring in more lights, for example. So I want to do some of these things right now. Also maybe fix a little bit of the issues that I'm having with the jaw. Most of the time with the jaw area, I leave it to quite later on in the painting these days, mainly because it's fairly easy to edit, because we have these wonderful darknesses in here, right? And this darkness is our savior and our all-father, because we can just make really quick changes and it's just going to look fine, because we have this voluminous, ambiguous area of dark, so we can just play around with it to get the read we're looking for. Are you going to FCD? Or is it settled already? No news on Art Center? No, I've actually not got a response from Art Center. I got a mail saying that you can now apply for illustration, but FCD was my number one pick, and I got it, so I will 100% be going there. I really wanted to get FCD and I got it, so happy about that. Again, we really measure your value, because it's just way better for where I'm at right now. Because it's not as much of a time investment, it's not 4 whole years, which is super important, really matters to me that it's not. and the fact that it's closer, it's less expensive, and I generally kind of like what I see from FCD students, rather what I've seen from FCD in general. Cheers, Russell, thank you. Very good school, so if I play my cards right, I should be already working in the industry by the time I graduate. We'll see. I'm a hard worker, but again, I don't make brash claims if I don't think that I can easily substantiate them. And I have a very good work ethic when it comes to painting, but the requirement is very steep there, so we'll see. I will try my best though. Throw some beautiful reds on there. Cheers, Abs, thank you. I always want to throw some more reds on those areas of the eyes. It brings a lot of life to the characters. A common mistake that I see, that I've made myself, is having this homogeneous understanding of material. But a couple of things to consider there, really, really important things. Number one is that when light interacts with a changing surface, so when your planes are changing, your light's not going to just stay the same, right? It's going to have a varied effect on the planes. And most of the time, we understand this in terms of value. However, the colors of the piece themselves will indeed be affected by this, right? The colors are not just completely isolated from this idea. So in the Richard Schmidt book, in Alla Prima, great book, definitely read it if you're a painter, he talks about this. He talks about the idea that, okay, well, my transitions in value oftentimes must mandate some thought towards transition in color. Really, really important. So we kind of use this idea to our benefit, and we say, okay, well, there's a transition in value happening, so what about the color, huh? Because half the time where things look a bit muddy, or they look unfinished, or look too plain, this is mostly the reason behind all of those things. The reason is mostly because of the idea that we have not considered the fact that light changes its amount of effect, right? In production painting, in just general painting, painting from people like, let's say, Nathan Fox, for example. He's a DreamWorks artist. He titles this, he calls it the interaction of light and surface. And his little thesis behind that is what he says is when the light is interacting with the plane that is facing it, it will have the most amount of effect. Basically what that means is when an object curves away from less light to more light, aka it turns from away from the light source towards the light source, it gets brighter always, and it gets more of an effect of that light source. Really, really important. Super, super important. So let's just say that I was having a red light source in this piece. That means that the planes that are currently somewhat lit would get a little bit of red on it, like that, for example. And the planes that are more lit will get, what did I say, lighter and more of the effect, so more red. And the planes that are the lightest are going to get the most amount of red and the most amount of value. And that's how it would ultimately translate. Of course, there's some variation with saturation, because I wouldn't usually paint it down this low in the color scale, but that's the idea. That's how you kind of show that it's a light. Because if you just did like variations, so basically this would be like that, for example. But if you just did variations of the same color, we did this, and then that, that's not how it works really. So everything kind of changes when it comes down to realistic portrayals of light. And it is really, really important. It is really important because most of the time when people say, I want to draw stylized artwork, they don't mean I want to draw artwork which has no semblance of realistic lighting. They mean I want to draw the proportions kind of wacky, but I definitely want to draw the lighting realistic. So understanding realistic lighting, really, really important. One of those most important things you have to learn is how do I paint realistic lighting? And interaction of light and surface. I mean, I can go into that more maybe later on in the stream, but that's like one of those big things that you can't bullshit your way through. Because if it's wrong, your whole piece suffers for it. It's very, very much wrong if it's wrong. One of those big things. I always ask myself, how do you plan to pay for Art Center? You know what I actually planned on doing around me when Art Center was the goal? I planned on taking 2 years and then dropping out and getting a job. That was my initial plan. Zeking, thanks for the follow, man. I'm sorry, thanks for the raid. I was on default mode there for a second. I do appreciate that. Welcome guys from the Zeking stream. Doing some portrait painting right now, all of it's narrated. But here's some examples of portraits that I've done in the past. I am basing most of my information, not most of it, but some of the stylistic choices on some master studies that I did recently of a really great contemporary artist called John Lariva. Go check him out on Patreon and on YouTube, great videos. But yeah, this is what I'm doing right now.
I can't believe you've done this.
Thanks, Grande. Thanks, Satsuni. Appreciate that. Is it Zeking and then Grand A Zeking? Oh, it's just Grand A. Good. Never mind. Sorry, I misread that. Thank you for that compliment. Zatsuni, I think that is. What were you working on, Zeking? You want to just share that with the chat? It is yours. So a couple of things that we need to solve here, because there are certain problems. So when you stylize something, when you draw something that isn't directly from the reference, it's up to you to try and figure out how to manage the various aspects of your painting, right? So we have this blue in here. Now, one of the biggest problems with this blue is it's isolated. So for concept pieces, what we call this particular area, it's not unified, and we need to unify it, which means that we need to kind of have an idea of this in more than just this location. So one of the most common ways of like unifying that is just we utilize this particular value or this temperature in other areas. So I'm just going to paint a little bit of it on the neck and maybe a little bit of it right over there, just unifying it, right? Just having it in more than one location. Now it looks more natural, right? Now it looks more believable, because otherwise painting a blue on a face, that's a death sentence for a lot of pieces. You got to be careful with this idea. It's not such a trivial, like I'm going to do it, because you don't want it to look like it's just like face paint. You want to make sure that it's integrated with the piece, because one of the biggest things that separates intermediate from beginner work, I feel like, is that things start to become more intentional and less incidental. And it's a big deal to me when I see that transition. That means that somebody's actually like really putting the time into what they do. And it'll affect the quality of the piece as well. Because when things start to look more like just it accidentally happened, it really does affect like the quality of that piece when things just look accidental. So make sure that you have a strong notion whenever you work. Storyboard, you want to share? DT, how's it going, buddy? This over here is a top facing plane. Light's coming from top left. So again, we grab a value that's top left appropriate and we just place it in there. So this is top left appropriate right there. We'll just do a couple of things. We'll key it down and we'll shift it to more desaturated red. We get this value. Maybe a little bit more saturation again. We test once, test twice, and that's sufficient. We'll allow that to continue. There we go. Easy enough. Just got home. How are you? Doing well. Doing well. Just doing some painting. Appreciate you coming by. Everything has some sort of justification, right? If you want to be just as literal as possible and still be an artist, I would almost argue you'd be better as an artist than somebody that's very intuitive, because when you have a good understanding of exactly what you're doing, you get to play around with it, man. Principle is everything when it comes to painting. Understanding principle. Well, I wouldn't say everything. I would definitely say, however, that when you want to like make that big shift from beginner to intermediate, what I see half the time is that people stop abiding by these rules and they start thinking about the principle behind the rule. What is an example of this? Well, perhaps a good example is all those fundamental ideas of how do I get good colors on my piece? People will say to a beginner, well, you got to think about warm versus cool, right? Really big thing. Always everybody talks about it, but what's the fundamental principle behind warm versus cool? Where does that come from? Because if we understand that, opens up this crazy window, because now we can start playing around with so many things. So things like that, for example, are good examples. If anybody's wondering about the warm versus cool thing, by the way, I can explain that later. Not particularly relevant for this piece, but it's good. They are for an assignment, so they aren't great. This lecture is quite nice, and that's more than enough. All right, well, cheers. A couple of things to note here. So again, always at every epoch, kind of take a step back and evaluate what we're looking at. I think I'm missing a bit of light here on that far right side. Let's put a little bit of light there, shall we? And while I put this light in, so we'll sprinkle it in maybe with a brush like this. We'll sprinkle the light in. While I do this, maybe we want to bring a little bit more saturation in the cheek. So we bring it down towards the reds and we saturate it. Right, down and saturate. Can you see that? A little bit of that little red in there. We'll try another variation of this, because again, I don't make decisions immediately, but I don't take too long with making them either. Maybe a little bit less than that, I think. Again, because it's skin, right? So skin is so closely situated next to each other. So that's one of those big like important things to realize, is that it's so close together that you can't really have these crazy color changes, these crazy value changes, and have it still read realistically. Because skin as a whole, like if I was to simplify this face, all of these areas would be on the same plane. This would be one breakout, the nose. The maw of the mouth, perhaps, would be another break, but everything else would be relatively on the same plane, right? Which means that the value difference between this and this, it cannot be too severe. Otherwise, it tends to harden the face up, tends to dehumanize the face, tends to statuify the drawing. A whole bunch of things happen. So just be a little bit aware of this. For example, right over here, I might tend to slightly warm it up, slightly lighten it up as a correction of this particular area. You see that all of it's helping, you know, it all helps. It's green, maybe I don't like it as much. Maybe I'll warm it up even ever slightly over that. The green actually comes from that underpaint. Actually, I kind of dig that green, if I'm going to be honest. I think that was just there. We can leave it right over here, maybe. I'll do a single strand of that right over there. And near the nose, what I'll do is I'll bring some of that red back, because I do want it to be red around the nose. Again, just like very simple, very, very well justified strokes. That's what we're trying to do here. Let's actually handle the eyes a little bit, just a tiny little bit, before we continue any further, because it's going to help me a lot to kind of finalize the proportions a lot. For my final proportions, I tend to look at the eyes and then just measure things off of that. We'll affect the occlusions a little bit. Occlusion is super important, by the way. If you're wondering what occlusion is, it's when light is occluded, meaning blocked from certain areas.
Oh, fuck.
And super, super important. Duplicate, thanks for following. But the idea behind that is that certain areas on the face are going to be quite dark, and really, really important to assess that, because it tells the brain so much information. Why is that area so dark? What is a contour that creates darkness of that magnitude? So one of the most renowned internet artistic teachers, or art teachers rather, her name is Istebrak. She talks about the importance of occlusions in some of her initial lectures, and she says, for a point to be dark, so many things need to happen, especially when the light's facing this. Could you imagine if the light's facing right over there? There's like a dark in the middle. So this being dark tells us that there's a certain amount of volume, there's a certain amount of mass that's covering this area, as we would expect to see on a face. Right? It's covering this area, the nostril is wrapped around, and that's creating this darkness, right, within an area of light. So it's super formative. Same thing on the left-hand side over here. When I add an occlusion to the side of this lip, suddenly the entire lip starts to pop a bit more. Why is that? It tells me how the lip is wrapped around the orbicularis oris, right? It tells me how it's wrapped around, more information. Also, since we did a planal breakdown initially, just for a quick little idea on how it's broken down for the mouth, this is how it's broken down for the mouth, the planes, at least how I break it down. We start right over there. I can start right over here depending on who you are. I do it right over here. So 1, 2, and then 3, and then 4. That's the basic maw of the mouth, basically. So technically it's like this. It's like 1, 2, and I think about a node here, and then 3, 4. So what exactly is this painting? For this particular painting, by the way, to kind of unify it, it's like that. So what is this? This is the orbicularis oris, muscle for the mouth, big deal. You have a couple of nodes on your mouth, which are somewhat spherical, so you can think about this as a sphere. We'll get to why that's important later. And then we have the actual mouth itself, right? This area on top is called a philtrum. That's over here. Then you have two kind of tubular facing ideas. These are basically deconstructed as triangles. So to draw it out, it's one triangle up there with a left plane and a right plane, one triangle over here with a left plane and a right plane. That's how you break it down. That's your philtrum. And your lips themselves. People have a varied way of drawing lips. Some people say draw a couple of circles and then kind of fill it around. Like I said, I'm a very structural guy, so I prefer structure. So basically we can break it down into this form over here. So left hand, it's the left plane right here. That's left plane. Over there, front plane, and then right plane. And really important, if you want to start thinking way more three-dimensionally, the drawing through aspect of this is super important because it wraps around, okay? Really, really important, because when you see this wraparound idea, it'll really elevate like the realisticness of your paintings, because a lot of things in the body wrap around, but you might not be thinking about it just yet. For instance, this area over here on the bottom of the chin, it wraps around, because when you consider this area in profile, right? Draw a quick little profile. When you consider this area on the chin, it doesn't just wrap, it doesn't just stop here and then becomes a block at the end, right? What happens to chin is it slowly kind of wraps into the neck, right? Right over there, that's what happens. So it wraps like that. So basically what's happening is that you have light, halftone, and then shadow. So people forget the halftone and they terminate the chin way too soon. But you see this little value over here? That's a halftone right over there. And then it goes into shadow. That's why you can properly terminate something in the face. More than likely, I will add an additional shadow value over here in this shape to say that there's a halftone from this side to aid with the read. right? That's the idea. So thinking about it structurally, because that's the structure of the chin, right? The chin has a very similar structure to this area on the top. It has a front plane like that. It has a little bit of a roundness over here. Depends on how you construct it, of course. It has a side plane goes all the way here, for example. This is the chin of the skull, and then it goes into areas near the jaw, for example. And then it has a bottom plane. That's what's most important. And the bottom plane gets a little bit of light. Because now that I know that, if the skylight was getting light from the bottom, for instance, if there was bounce light, it would go on that bottom facing plane, right? It would go right over there. That's bottom facing. Then it becomes front facing. Really important, man. Very, very important to remember that. Ollie, how's it going, man? Oh, I already answered the question. You already answered that question. I saw your name just now again. But doing some painting, good to hear. I just defaulted you, Polly. I apologize. Don't mean to default you, but you know how it is. Okay, continue this timer, by the way. Okay, so we got some read on the lips right there. So again, a little bit of darkness on the bottom side of this lip. Usually we just overall just darken up that lip on the bottom plane. I don't generally like doing it these days. I like to give some attention towards the structure. So I add a little bit of information right over there. A little bit of that plane will transition from dark to more dark. And you see that adds a little bit to that painting. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't add all that much. But again, once you start going deeper and deeper and deeper into the structure of things, it does matter. It does matter. So the more detail that's on here, the more those little things are going to actually have a big impact. Temperature is an issue here. This is an occlusion, or rather a very deep shadow, aka an occlusion, in the lips, which are very warm, but the temperature doesn't reflect that. So we're going to up the temperature right over there. We're going to up it, and we're going to introduce a beautiful, nice, lovely warm there. And you see how that fixes it? I went from that to that. We went from dead to alive. Big deal, man. Consider the shadow temperature. Very, very common mistake in art that I see. That I personally make, by the way. Like, I'm not on some fucking high horse over here. I make all these mistakes, which is why I point them out. Right? So you don't have to make those mistakes. But you probably still do them, and I encourage you guys to do that as well, because that's how we learn. And hopefully your set of mistakes will be different from mine. So you can teach me yours, and I can teach you mine. And everybody learns. Beautiful saturation up there. Lip. And we can just continue, right? Looking not too shabby. I want more strong saturated elements, which I'll start to introduce here. So we'll bring in more saturation around the nose. And bring it down here, bring it down here. We can just block in a little bit of red on there, maybe. Perhaps it's a bit too much. Let's keep things sensible. Sensible ideas, please. That's all right. That's sensible. It's within the realm of possibility. Anything that I want to do for the aid of the read? I think I do indeed want to start to add slight amounts of darkness to the bottom over here. I'll paint them with a little bit of a soft brush. Most of my painting right now has been done with a singular brush, by the way. If you use Krita, it is the, what is it called again? It's called a blocking brush in the oil pack of the Digital Atelier set. Really like this set, really like the edges. But generally speaking, if you're starting to paint digitally, just pick a simple brush and go at it. Do not overcomplicate. Overcomplication is a death of painting. And also why a lot of people witness, or rather will be subjected to art block and things like that, is most of the time when you face art block, you've been drawing something that's not familiar to you. You've been drawing something that's a little bit difficult. It's just natural. Don't worry about it. People have varied ways of getting around art block. Personally, if you want to know my particular way, I just keep painting. I just switch my subjects off and I keep painting. I just can't, I don't think I can afford just missing a day of work. It's just not really thinkable to me. I'll just keep painting. I just shift the subject matter. If I was going to do faces in 2 weeks, for example, I would just do a face. If I'm going to do compositions in 2 weeks, I'd do compositions. If I was struggling on something else, for example, like if I was drawing animals, it wasn't working out, I would just switch it to something else. I would never stop painting. I don't believe in that idea. But of course, if it works for you, then nobody can tell you otherwise, right? Ultimately, this is a very specific, very personal journey, so there are no rules. There's something to aid with the read right there. Of course, muddy up that edge slightly. And we're doing okay. Let's put those eyes in. It's a really, really simple simplification of the eyes. So we go 1, again, plain, always think plainly. 1, 2, and then 3, right over there. Again, on the side seems to be perfectly fine. Maybe a little bit more of a left plane right over there. I don't really like working on this harsh dark line, but what can you do? It's the eyebrow. It's fine. All right, what are we missing? Beyond that, I want to have a little bit of a shape right over there. I want to have a dark saturated shape to show the curve on the orbit. So when I say dark saturated, you see how dark and saturated it actually is. Really not that much, right? But again, understand the context of this, right? It's a context. It's in a light area. It's in a light area. It's in a saturated area. So therefore, it has to have this kind of color on it. And have a slightly lighter value up here as well. I'll pick a more precise brush, perhaps. Something like that is fine. And I'm just trying to size this brush. I'm not painting right now. I'm just sizing the brush. These brushes get really finangly when they're smaller, so I don't have to worry about it. That's fine. Okay, now we affect the eye itself. Let's just block out that shape. Before I do that, I always like to just put in like the lights of the eyes. The lights, generally speaking, how do we sample the lights? They're going to be mostly like a desaturated color of your environment. Most of the cases, so we'll just pick the environment color, we'll desat it. It's just something like that. I think that's fine for our current idea. Maybe I prefer it to be more of a desat red. If you're wondering about the colors that I can see, I'm very good at spotting color and very good at like picking exact color if I want to. But the one color that I cannot ever see is desaturated reds. Very bad at it. So basically what I've done to compensate for that is if ever I'm having a hard time deciding what a color needs to be or what a color is that I'm seeing visually, I just pick a desaturated red and it's usually right. So it's almost like picking by exclusion, which is a good workaround. That's kind of just getting a nice clear idea of where those eyes are supposed to go, because it's going to help me with the way I want to read this painting. That's fine, I think. I think it's going all right. All right, a couple of things. Is it not a good idea to desat the flesh tone for the eyes? No, it is not. Mainly because the eyeball is reflective, so it's going to take on more of a characteristic from the environment and from the light sources than the actual color of the skin or the flesh. That's just because the eye, it's not even flesh inside the eye, right? So thinking about it as a derivative of flesh is just wrong, because that's sclera in the eye, so it's not going to have that kind of coordination, I don't think, right? It's a different material altogether. Not the jelly of the eye, the sclera of the eye. Altogether different material. So I would not draw that parallel at all. Seems a little bit limiting. Angie, how's it going, man? Good to see you. Usually I reserve some of the dark values over here for later on in the piece, but I think right now is the time that we start to really start to paint with some fire here. So let's actually simplify that shadow shape right over there. And now I can finally bring this hair to where it needs to go. Right now I want to bring this all the way in here. And as I go closer and closer to the face, I do want to think about reddening this up. I want to warm this up a little bit. Because usually I leave a little bit of room here on the face while I make changes. And then once I'm happy enough with those changes, I just jump in and I put in those final ideas of what the shape's going to be. So that's what I just did. Maybe I can be a little bit looser with my gesture there. That's fine as well. This is hair, for God's sakes. I mean, how much do you want to finagle with it, really? Can't wait the day comes to duel you when I practice enough. Yeah, I mean, maybe dueling me shouldn't be the goal, but hey, if it keeps you motivated, then whatever, right? Whatever keeps you motivated. How are you doing? I don't often catch a stream, but I follow your work on IG all the time. Yeah, no, thanks you for all the kind words in the IG. But it's going quite well. Got into the art school, like I said. The pieces are okay. I'm not doing nearly as much work as I usually do, but that's because of, not because I'm lazy, it's just because there's so much going on in life right now. Not stuff that I really bring to the stream. I have a very particular like criterion of things that I talk about on stream, and that doesn't fall into them. So yeah, just a little bit of distraction outside painting, but it's fine. Always thinking about painting, and it gives me a lot of time to watch tutorials and stuff, so I come back to painting with a lot more information, which is nice. Because sometimes I don't have the time to dedicate properly to watching tutorials and stuff. It's usually in the background while I work. Glow, how's it going, buddy? We were talking about you earlier. About the Asaro head that you posted. was very useful. I actually used it on a few pieces yesterday. It's good. Just developing some interesting looking shapes here, because hair is ambiguous, and ambiguous is it's always nice to paint. I really encourage you guys to never ever think about something differently in the way of what it is, right? Because ultimately, what is hair, right? Hair is just light shades on top of dark shades with interesting edges. So start there, and then don't think about it too complex, because otherwise things get really out there, right? You forget about the value, the structure, the temperature. Something goes awry, and ultimately the entire hair fails, and we think, oh, it's because hair is complex, but it's really not. Right? It's really not that complex. Right? We don't want to make it complex, because we could easily go in here and paint every single strand, but is that really going to benefit us for the overall scope of this piece? Like, is it something we want to do? Well, not really. Not really. It's not going to benefit us all that much. So interesting shapes, interesting values, good color, and then at the very end we can add context. We can add context with a little bit.
I can't believe you've done this.
With a little bit of texture, with a little bit of intricate strokes, perhaps. You know, we could easily do that. But at the very beginning, what is it, right? Marcus Aurelius, right? What is it in and of itself? Well, it's just light versus dark, right? So we just get the light versus dark first, and everything else is secondary, right? Really important is break it down, because otherwise things can become a little bit daunting. I'm not saying that hair is the same as skin, but when you're painting something from a reference, right? When you're trying to convey a certain idea, I mean, ultimately it's just light versus dark, right? It's just light versus dark with some management of color. So let's not escape from that entirely. Of course, there's contextual things to think about, but when something is difficult, always important to simplify. So how do we simplify something that's complex? I mean, we just look at it through blurred, defocused eyes, and what do we see? We see these blurry dark shapes versus these blurry light shapes. I think that's all that we need to concern ourselves with, because we're in that stage right now. We're blocking this in, we're in that blurry stage, we're painting a blur right now. And then later on, we can go back in here. We can paint specifics. But again, like I said before, a painting is a gestalt, a summation of a bunch of simple ideas. You see a great painting, most of the time that painting was done with simple ideas with very good execution, and all those ideas took the artist a great amount of time to conclude, to kind of figure out. But we have the benefit of information, so we can start to learn from people. One of the biggest, most jarring things I realized when I started learning painting, like almost formally, right? So learning from real masters and real people that knew how to paint, was just how simple they did it, man. It was incredible. That's how jarring it was. I was sitting there with a billion shapes and a billion colors, and I was wondering, oh my goodness, how do I make it more complex so that I have a good painting? But then I realized, it strikes me, right, so clearly that, oh, wait a second, I'm looking at this guy who spent his entire life painting realism, and it turns out that he has, at the end of his painting, maybe the same amount of shapes that I have 10 minutes into my painting. What gives? Am I wrong? Is he wrong? Well, yeah, well, I am wrong, because I don't need it. I don't need that much. Arguments can be made saying that, well, what if it's your style of painting? Sure, I'll agree with that to a certain extent. But at the very beginning of the painting, if you have 50 million shapes, and that's your style, you're just making a mistake, honestly. It's not a good idea. It's not controllable. It's not reliable. It's just not good. I have plenty of shapes later on, though. But it's one of those good design, well, just good practices in general. Don't have things nice and controllable at the very beginning. Like when you're staging a piece, you want to be able to actually have access to manipulate things in a reasonable degree, right? So in that sense, I feel like it's fairly important. Okay, let's put in some little highlights here. Again, we want to unify the palette on this piece, so the highlights are going to go warmer because it's a warm light, and they're going to go brighter because it's a highlight. However, we maintain the idea that the highlight has saturation because highlights do have saturation. If you're painting all the highlights default bright white, it's a mistake. So consider the idea that the object itself might be generally darker. Local value is what we call that. And the light source might have a certain amount of color to it. We call that color temperature of the light source. So we don't start down here. We start somewhere over here. So those little things that really give you that full kind of range of what the painting could be. Really important to explore all possibilities right there. Because you see like how much of a difference that makes, that kills it. This is reasonable. Perhaps we can make some slight little ideas here, maybe push it even further. But remember that we really gotta figure out like really what's happening there, right? Really master that subtlety. And that's what's gonna give us a really good painting. I'm gonna slightly muddy up these edges, by the way. I actually don't like that light. I want to just keep it this much, I feel like. That's sufficient for me. I want to slightly soften up these edges as well. Am I happy with the overall color space of this painting? It certainly is interesting. A couple of things though. I do want to unify that blue even further. So we could make some attempts to do that, perhaps mostly around the throat region, maybe a little bit on the right eye perhaps, and maybe around the glabella a little bit more. Glabella's here, by the way. And also I want to maybe slightly crop in the entire piece. So we'll crop in really quickly. Right over there. I think that's perfectly fine. Crop it in. Let's just do that again, but more central, because I want the face to be a bit more central. That's fine. I can also consider making some mild modifications to my background here. So remember, the background serves the piece, right? Everything, it all serves to kind of amplify your read. So we could maybe make the background a little bit lighter, potentially, and that'll allow us to get a stronger read with the hair. So maybe a little bit things like this, for example. That'll give me a stronger read. So like I said, I don't care too much about the background at the beginning, but now that I have a lot of my decisions in the canvas made, I can start to put these slight little variations in my background, make it a little bit lighter than it was, and sort of have the piece have a bit stronger of a read. Because remember, everything that you put in your canvas is part of your painting. This might seem obvious, but a lot of people ignore this. They put their paintings against white backgrounds, or they put their paintings against like a complementary color, but in the wrong way, right? So it affects the read more than it helps it. So consider this. And the reverse is also applicable, right? The reverse is easily applicable. If I want less of a read, perhaps I'll pick a very homogeneous color. If I want more of a read, then the opposite. You can start to deepen these ideas on this little thing over here. I think, you know what, to unify this little blue here, these values are going to get translated from being versions of deep red to be versions of, I would say, a deep bluish green is what I'm going to interpret it as. Because again, unification is important. I don't want little islands of random color. I want things to be well defined on my canvas. I mean, that's one of those big differences, you know, between something being a local color, aka being the color of the object, or the color of the light, is that light's going to affect whatever is bright, you know, and it's going to have a negative effect, or that's going to have no effect in the darks. So just keeping that nice and unified across the piece is going to have such a crazy impact on the overall piece. Thanks, Mr. True, I appreciate you. Very nice of you to say. Very kind of you to say. I think I'm alright. Okay, unifying a little bit more. And of course it's all learnable, like always. We will make this a point to say that everything that I do right now I feel like can be learned in a year by a very dedicated person. Even still, you know, I've been saying this for almost a year now. I've been painting again for about a year and a half. But I really believe that somebody dedicated can get this far with no experience prior. Quite easily, I think. There's nothing complicated happening here. It's all simple. It's all manageable. But I do appreciate it. Don't mean to diminish your compliment, which is very kind. I feel like people do that fairly often these days, especially on Twitch, you know? People will say, oh, you're so talented, and people will go like, oh, well, it's not talent, you know, it's skill. But, you know what they mean, though, right? You know what they mean. They just mean that you do it well. I feel like sometimes people just miss out on the meaning of things. Nobody wants to demean anybody else. They're trying to be polite. Just to clarify there.